Welcome, everyone.
Good evening, Mayor.
Welcome, everyone. How are you?
Good evening, Mayor.
How are you, Kyle?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Welcome, everyone. How are you?
Good evening, Mayor.
How are you, Kyle? Sounds like it's in a, sounds like the sound is going around in circles, in a loop. Welcome, Dustin.
Hello, Mayor. Happy National World Chocolate Day.
I heard that. We could have.
I haven't celebrated yet.
Oh, no. I got some
Maybe
chocolate
maybe
peanuts
they're-
out there. I have to go get some and eat them in front of you. Welcome, Heidi.
Hello.
Heidi, we were just talking about the most important thing of the day, and it is World Chocolate Day.
I'd like to say I did my part in celebrating today.
Good, very good. Not me, not yet. When you see my camera go off, then I'm probably celebrating. Is Chief Larson here yet?
No.
No. I saw him at Costco on July 4th. No, maybe the day after. And he was wearing the greatest shirt I've ever seen.
What was that?
I couldn't. It was a short sleeve collared shirt with the Declaration of Independence written
Really?
here, and then on the pocket was like an American flag. So
My goodness.
he was very noticeable in the crowd.
I'm
Also,
wearing my 4th of July tie today.
oh, there you go. You're festive.
Welcome, Paul.
I don't think he heard you, or he doesn't want to talk to us tonight.
I'm back on. My thing was being weird. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, sorry.
Brian's, I was talking about Paul. The mayor said hi to him, and Paul.
I just,
There
my
there you
audio just came on.
Right.
I could
Wait.
see you speaking, and I couldn't hear anything.
We thought you didn't want to talk to us.
Well, there is that, you know. No, I want to talk to you.
All right.
Quinn, but he's muted and invisible. Are you there, Quinn?
I'm here.
Okay. All right. Well,
It's all of us.
let's get this started then. We have the workshop tonight is to discuss single-family zone. And, that's always important to our city. Nate, are you ready to?
I'm ready to go if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, let me share my screen. All right, let me know if you can see that. I want to make it so I can see all of you and see my screen at the same time. So hold on a second. Okay, great. So let me move my mic. Never mind, I'll leave it where it is. So what we wanted to do is today we're going to have just a work session on the single family zones. And in the staff or in the work session report, then I kind of put together the objectives that I'm hoping that we can get through. And I know an hour seems like a lot of time, but an hour isn't a lot of time when you're talking about single family zones, and we have a lot of different things to cover. But what I want to do is really to start with just to provide a review to all the council members of what these single family 1 and 2 zones allow and sort of the related process and issue surrounding those. And I wrote a little bit about this in the staff report. Typically, as you put together a general plan, then you're looking for the public input to weigh in on those general plan, and you get to some degree some level of public input, sometimes from some people, but not always from all of the community. And I think you don't always get the community understanding what the general plan is and how that affects property rights and property use throughout the city. And really when a citizen gets involved is when all of a sudden a development is happening close to their neighborhood or in their backyard or next door to them. And they feel like that's the time to come and weigh in with planning commission and with council. And what they don't often understand is how the general plan works, how the zoning ordinances work, and how the process works. And so they can feel extremely frustrated because they feel like they don't feel like it. They basically at that point have missed the opportunity to weigh in on how the community is being developed. And so since we've been seeing a couple of these issues coming up, and you always see these issues coming up, I thought it would be a good time to kind of revisit the single family zones so that council is fully aware of the process and what we're allowing and not allowing in there. But it's also a good time to show that we're willing to engage the public whenever we have a chance to, so that they understand the process, and so that if we do go through and make changes to the general plan and make changes to the single family zones, that there is opportunities for them to weigh in. So it seems like when there's sort of some public outcry about one development, that might be a good time. And as much as you want to, I mean, it's great to look at a development and say, well, that's just related to that neighborhood or those neighbors around there. But in reality, if a development like that happened in any neighborhood, you can kind of, to some degree, expect that the neighbors would react the same way. So even though those are specific case studies, those are actually very good case studies on how people feel about zoning and how we may or may not want to change single family zones, protect the single family zones, all of that sort of stuff. So the first part, we'll have Alex kind of review what's allowed in a single family zone, review the process, review administrative decisions versus legislative decisions. And then the second part, we really want to just, I've put some questions together that I want the council to talk about and kind of discuss together with staff on what we want to see in these zones, if anything. And then the last part is we put together a whole list of different strategies that we might want to enact, but we've just really just sat down and brainstormed some of these. So as you kind of come together and say what you expect a single family area to look like, we can apply those different strategies. Some of them might work, some of them might not work, but strategies that you find interesting, we want to go and do some more research and dig into how those might be enacted and whether those would achieve the goals that you want to see as council for the community. So we'll go through those really, really quick, and you won't feel like you have enough information on those just because we have to go through them so quick. But we'll continue to have this conversation, and we'll continue to get these single family zones where you want to see them for the community. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to that. But that's the basic outline. From there, I'm going to turn the time over to Alex, and he is going to take us through single family zones.
Good evening, everybody. I'm glad we could sit down and have this conversation. As Nate said, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what our zones currently allow and how that relates to certain types of projects, most specifically master plan developments, as that's the type that seems to have spawned some of the concerns we've been hearing about lately. So to get started, Nate, if you'll go to that next slide for me. So we have in Midvale I'd call it 2.5 single family zones. Generally speaking, the purpose of these zones is intended to allow for the continuation of low density residential neighborhoods. It's fairly, most of our single family zone areas are fairly well developed. What we kind of consider that east side of Midvale was developed under the county's jurisdiction, the west side under kind of the cities. And in those 2.5 zones, you'll find a variety of other subsidiary purposes like allowing commercial and recreational activities that are compatible with the neighborhoods, providing opportunities for variation in design and housing types, providing opportunities for 2-family or agricultural uses in specific overlay areas, preserving existing neighborhoods as much as possible, and those kinds of things. In these zones, there's a lot of uses that are listed, but it generally breaks down to the ones that I have here on the screen. We're looking at allowing single family dwellings, obviously in both of those zones and in all of those areas. In duplex overlay areas, we allow 2-family dwellings or duplexes. We also, in those duplex zones or overlays, allow those 2-family dwellings to be subdivided, encouraging individual ownership of each unit or allowing individual ownership of each unit. In agricultural overlay areas, we also allow agricultural uses. That does have some larger property size requirements and a minimum lot area, so to speak, that we don't have a whole lot of, but it's there. We also allow master plan developments, neighborhood commercial developments, and then public and quasi-public facilities like your schools, churches, etc. I mentioned 2.5 zones. It's really the single family 1, single family 2, and single family 1 with the duplex overlay. And you can see the max densities here, which are what most folks tend to concentrate on, ranging from a little over 6 to about 12.5 units per acre, just depending on the zone type. And then to kind of give you an idea what that looks like, Nate, could you go to the next one for me? I've got a book here in the office that's called Visualizing Density, and it gives a wide range of pictures and references to kind of give you an idea what density at different scales looks like. We have kind of a preconception in Utah about what low density or single family residential development looks like. It tends to focus on that approximately 7,000 to 10,000 square foot lot size. That puts you at about 1/4 or 1/5 to 1/4 of an acre in size. And on the On the largest lot size, that's about 6 units an acre. Here's a few examples. You can see there are a few different housing types in that 6 units per acre, ranging from individual houses, single family detached, to townhomes or condo-ish styles. And then Nate, if you go to the next one, that 6 units per acre, by the way, would be functionally equivalent to our single family 1 zone. This is about our single family 2 zone at approximately 8 to 9 units per acre. Again, you can see a variety of housing types. We've got on the left the Portland example that's right under 9, which is all single family detached. Tampa in the middle is really more of a mobile home park, but still kind of that same sort of density. And then Chicago on the right with a little bit more intensity. And then one more for me, Nate. And then on the high end, we allow up to about 12.4 at the maximum. And here's a few examples of what that looks like in a couple different places across the country. This book is, it's here in the office if you ever want to take a look. It ranges from less than 1 unit per acre to well over 100 units per acre. And so you can kind of get an idea of what that density looks like on a wide range of scales. And the reason I mention that is thinking about density only is just one factor that comes into play when talking about residential development, whether it's single family or multifamily. There's a lot more that goes into development and community building than just the density. And Nate, if you go to the next slide for me, master plan developments are one way to kind of see that happen. Master plan developments, or as some other folks call them, planned unit developments, are intended to provide flexibility in design and use. So you have a wide variety of housing types, unit sizes, etc. And in some places where appropriate, this includes providing mixed uses. If you try and search for master plan development on the internet, you'll typically find a lot of conversation about large mixed use developments where it's maybe like a movie theater surrounded by a shopping mall with apartments kind of thing. We don't tend to have that sort of scale in Midvale, but that's kind of the idea, allowing a variety of use types where they're appropriate. Master plan developments allow the developers to consider overall community goals, and in doing so, typically receive exceptions to some specific or rigid requirements. That might be something like there's a density limit and a perimeter setback, but inside you can get some waivers to lot sizes or to building setbacks or various things like that. Master plan developments typically result in common areas and common maintenance. So you'll have an HOA, you'll have a higher level, a higher expectation, that is, of maintenance on some of those because it's one entity responsible for maintaining a larger area. And that typically allows them to provide amenities and design and architecture that's not typical of kind of your single family detached. That's true whether you're in Midvale or you're in Salt Lake or you're in California or New York. That's generally how they're applied across the board. When looking at them in Midvale, Nate, if you'd go one more for me, we've had master plan development provisions in the zoning ordinance for at least 20 years. I found it in a very old zoning ordinance that was originally adopted in the 80s, but I couldn't tell if it was adopted in the 80s or some point afterwards. In Midvale, we do have a minimum size requirement, 1 acre. So master plan developments aren't permitted on property less than that in size. We do establish a 50% open space requirement, which is the highest open space requirement of any project type in the city. Usually we're seeing somewhere in the 10 to 40%, depending on whether you're commercial or industrial or multifamily residential. Master plan developments are expected to provide a higher quality development, and so they have that higher standard. As part of that open space, there is also a requirement for some improved amenity areas, and this includes things like playgrounds, parks, picnic areas, sport courts, etc. We tend to provide some flexibility to the developer in choosing what those are because we don't necessarily have the market expertise to pick what should be installed there, but we do have that minimum area, so we'll get something as far as improved amenities are concerned. We do require a pedestrian network, so there does need to be a series or at least some sort of trail system that connects within the project and to the surrounding public network. Typically, that means we're seeing connections from the private streets to the public streets, and then within the project between the units and the amenity spaces, so that folks can walk around conveniently and easily from space to space. We do have some architectural standards that are a little bit more stringent than what are allowed for just traditional single family or other sorts of developments. We do require a set of CC&Rs and an HOA to maintain that common area. And then we do impose what we consider kind of the bulk requirements, the density, the external setbacks, the parking, as they're required by the zone. So master plan developments are allowed in just about every zone that we have in the city. So that means in single family 1, you'll have one set of setbacks. In single family 2, you'll have a different one, but they're the same that anybody else on a smaller lot would be held to. As incentives to push people towards master plan developments, we do, or I should say to push people towards master plan developments, we provide a list of incentives. In order to qualify for any of the incentives on this list, we do require compliance with all of the requirements listed there on the left. But as incentives go, we allow up to a 10% density bonus if everything else can be satisfied. That one's not very typical. Usually the parking and the open space requirements tend to preclude a density bonus. We do allow a multifamily configuration instead of requiring all of the units be attached either as single or 2-family units, depending on the zone. We'll allow townhomes, even stacked units if somebody wants to try it, although because of the height limits in the zones, that typically doesn't happen. We do allow reduced lot sizes. So you can have a lot that essentially covers the footprint of the unit instead of the 5,000 or 7,000 square foot minimum lot size that would be typical for the zone. That allows the individual ownership of each unit, and then also the common ownership of the amenity spaces. We also allow private streets, which transfers the responsibility for maintenance and installation and care to the HOA or the common ownership. We grant a 10% height bonus, and then we also can reduce parking requirements if the developer shows that it's justified based on the project type. Many of those aren't things that we see typically on kind of the stereotypical master plan development in the city. We don't tend to get a lot of density bonuses. We don't tend to get a lot of height bonuses. We don't tend to get a lot of reduced parking just because the availability or the land that we have available to develop doesn't really lend itself well to those incentives. But we see every project that's under an MPD take advantage of the reduced lot sizes, and then just about every project does private streets and multifamily configuration, townhomes, or at least more than 2 units in a building. Nate, next
Alan?
one. Yeah.
Hey, before you move to the next slide,
Uh-huh.
on the private streets issue.
Uh-huh.
I mean, looking at it, the long term, when they set up an HOA, the HOA is going to have the maintenance costs for that. But it's my understanding they will usually do private streets because they don't have to have streets that are as wide as the public ones. Is that correct?
That is the way that we have defined private street standards. It is allowed to be a narrower street. Yes. It's a 35-foot right of way instead of a 50-foot right of way.
All right.
Well, to piggyback on that, they also don't necessarily have to follow the same. I brought up a question about this, and maybe I misheard, but they might not follow the same quality standards in the road, right? As like how deep they do their asphalt or something along those lines, or require sidewalks on both sides and things along those lines, correct? Like with a private road?
The construction of the road itself isn't defined by the zoning ordinance. So usually it's reviewed by the city engineer. And if there are concerns, he'll call them out. They do typically need to build it to a standard that can support a fire truck. That's a pretty heavy vehicle. So we at least have that part for where the fire turnaround is. And most of our master plan developments are small enough that where the road is where the fire department will be. So they don't really have the flexibility to create a substandard road anywhere else. The sidewalks is one. We do allow 2 options for sidewalks in our private road standards. You can either have a 5-foot sidewalk on both sides with a monolithic curb, so there's no park strip. You would have a road, curb and gutter, and sidewalks. Or you can do a park strip and sidewalk on one side. So you'd have the road, curb and gutter on both sides, but a park strip and sidewalk only on one. That option isn't used as often because it tends to create some difficulties meeting the pedestrian network requirement. So we like to push people to do more sidewalks and less kind of dead open space or dead landscaping when it comes to reviewing those projects. We'll really only accept, at least at the staff level, the single sidewalk if there's a really good network kind of on the other side of the building, for instance.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
When it comes to procedure, this master plan developments tend to follow the same process. They tend to be relatively similar applications. They'll start with an initial contact at the staff level. We'll work with folks over the counter or over the phone, give them a brief overview of what they're expected to provide and give them kind of some feedback on whether the property they're looking at lends itself to that sort of development. And then once they put together a concept plan, we'll hold a development review committee meeting, which includes planning staff, engineering staff, unified fire, and a variety of other agencies if they're interested in attending. The list is like 15 or 20 people long at the moment, so we can get some pretty full rooms, but we make sure that everybody involved has an opportunity to provide comments, and then the developer leaves with a better understanding of what the expectation will be when it comes to actually submitting an application, which is the next step. The preliminary site plan and the subdivision typically go to the planning commission, and then that preliminary site plan will go, or the preliminary subdivision rather, will go to the council if it's large enough. And then some master plan developments do require a development agreement, not all of them. It applies to those that are over 5 acres in size. So many of our small ones don't trigger that standard, but if they do require a development agreement, they'll go to the council. And then following that preliminary approval, what the subdivision, the site plan, and the development agreement, if applicable, we'll go to a final site plan review, which is handled by staff, where we review the more detailed drawings based on the comments and requirements of the planning commission, and then those requirements in the zoning ordinance. And then it's typically closed off with the final subdivision in front of the council again. Next, Nate. So when talking about master plan developments, particularly with the way that our ordinance is laid out, it's important to spend a minute talking about legislative versus administrative decision making. This is a topic that we bring up a lot. There's a lot of the public doesn't quite understand the distinction here, so we on our staff side spend a lot of time trying to help people understand and educate what this means. On the legislative side, these are decisions that establish policies and create laws. So they're typically examples like text amendments, rezones, adopting general plans or small area plans or other sorts of plans that provide some policy directives to staff. They are decisions that can only be made by the legislative body. The city council makes legislative decisions. Nobody else really does. And they're not necessarily appealable. It's not like somebody could go to the hearing officer and say, the city council adopted a text amendment incorrectly. Although they may be overturned through an initiative or a referendum effort. On the administrative side, this is taking those policies and laws established by legislative decisions and applying them to specific requests, like applications typically are the easiest way to understand this. The city's ordinances authorize specific individuals or bodies to make these types of decisions. In our ordinance currently, it's split between the staff, the planning commission, the council, and a hearing officer, depending on the decision type to be made. Permitted uses are staff, conditional uses are planning commission, subdivisions are council, hearing officer does variances and appeals. Some examples of these ones are building permits, permitted use approvals like site plans, conditional use permits and subdivisions, even though they have public hearings, are administrative decisions. And they may be appealed to the hearing officer or to the courts, depending on who reviewed it last. And then finally, these are, once the ordinances are established through the legislative process, the city is obligated to follow those ordinances and apply them consistently. So this is where we run into probably the biggest misunderstanding when it comes to reviewing master plan developments and other projects, is many of the public would like us to not approve projects when they are required to be approved, or impose conditions that maybe aren't necessarily supportable by ordinance. And so we try to explain that we can't always do that. This is a topic that's very important to keep at the top of our minds as we talk about processes and approvals and projects and such, because the legislature is continually looking for reasons to take away the city's authority in the realm of land use. So even some things like as basic as architecture design standards were up for removal from the city's authority as recently as the last session, the last general session. There was a bill that came before the legislature that would strip local government's ability to impose kind of even the most basic of architectural standards on single family development. So we want to be sure that we're taking advantage of the authority that we're granted by the state to adopt zoning ordinances, but not necessarily pushing it so far that we bring the hammer down, so to speak, and lose our ability to impose certain requirements. Back to you, Nate.
Sorry, I was muted and I started talking. Let me add on to that, you know, the legislature just went through a process of adding penalties to communities that don't follow their own ordinance or own ordinances, but at the same time, the city has the ability to decide what those ordinances are, so long as we follow them. So that's something that we still do have. So I mean, when you talk about what we do in the legislative side is really putting together the general plan and putting together what the text looks like for those zoning ordinances. But if there's something where there's consistently issues coming up where we're saying, well, this is what our ordinance says and we have to follow it, even though we don't want to follow this, you know, the option is that you can't change that then and, you know, penalize the developer that's following the ordinance, but you do have the ability to go back and make changes to the ordinance so that they follow the way that you actually want the community to develop. You can't do that to stop a development, but you can do that so that future developments that have not yet applied have to follow those new ordinances and standards that you put in place. So it's important to reevaluate this if there's something that continually comes up that isn't in line with what council and the community want. You do have the ability to go back through the legislative process and fix those. So that's kind of an overview, a very quick overview of what's allowed in these zones. And I think highlighting the MPD process, you start to see that brings in a ton of flexibility into these zones, but at the same time, it potentially opens the door for things that you might not always want to see happen in some of these zones. And so this next section, we really just want to talk about, I don't have a whole bunch of slides on this because I really want council to express some of their opinions on this and kind of have a discussion. But these aren't the only questions, but these are kind of 4 questions that I think start the conversation is, at the basis level, what would you like to see happen, if anything, in these single family zones? On top of that, what type of development or redevelopment do you think is appropriate within zones? You always tend to think of zones as all being the same, but they aren't. There's different single family zones that have kind of hit different levels of development. And so there's a question of, are all of these single family zones the same? Are they equal stages of development? Is there one zone that we might think would be good to allow some of these MPD developments where there's other zones that don't have any of that type of development that are better left alone? And then the other question that kind of this all gets down to is the single family zones make up a large portion of the city. And what piece or what role do single family zones have in the economic growth and development of Midvale? As you talk to citizens, of course, a lot of them don't want to see development happen right next to their house, or they don't appreciate the size or the scale of the development, and they don't seem to fit into those neighborhoods. A lot of times that, I think we can all, from our own standpoint, agree with that. We all have, homes and live places and have an opinion on what happens around us. But at the same time, if you really just say, all we want in there are single family homes that look exactly like the single family homes that were there before, does that stop the city from progressing and developing? And is there a balance in there? And I think the answer is there is a balance in there. What is the balance that you think these different areas have in the community? And how do we kind of strike that balance? So the next step, we'll go through and we'll kind of list a bunch of different ideas that we have. But before we get there, I kind of want to let council think about these questions and take kind of turns answering what you see as an outcome for these single family zones in Midvale. And I'll let the mayor decide how you want to have people address that, or you can just address it. I don't know. But I'm not going to go on to a different slide until we have this conversation.
I think most of us will agree at point 3, that's all, are all single family zone areas at equal stages of development? No. So I think we'd all agree to that one. There are single family zones that couldn't be developed right now any more than they are, and there are some that could. So the ones that we're seeing issues with, obviously, are the ones that either a developer has come in and purchased several single family homes, and now they're developing it into something that's not a single family. So
going along.
That's the easier one to tackle, unless anyone disagrees.
No, I agree. And I think this adds to this conversation, but, looking at the deck for, the planning and zoning, it seems like there's several plans now for areas to take where there's one home. And I think there's at least 2 or 3 where they tear down the home and they're building new options. The fact that they're all coming up right now at the moment makes me think we are not capitalizing on this in a way that makes sense. It shouldn't be, it seems, to tear down a home to build new homes. We need to find ways to increase our revenue off of that. If we're going to allow something like that, we should definitely be charging money for that more than we are. I don't know how that would be, some kind of licensing fee or density fee or something along those lines, but
I think that's impact. You're talking about impact fees.
Yeah, because you're talking about progress and such. There should be a hard financial decision for someone to come into an area and tear down a home to build something new in these single family zones. So I don't think we're capitalizing off this as best as we can by any means. The fact that there's so many all at once coming with how expensive land is everywhere else in the valley.
And we have that as one of the options that we'll talk about, one of the strategies. There's impact fees. There's also all the development fees. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. That, I think, is all assuming that we don't want people to come in and knock down houses and build a bunch more houses. Because in some communities, that might actually be considered a strategy that they want. If they feel like there's a lack of housing and there's lot sizes that are too big, a community might say, we'll lower our development fees so that developers can come in and actually put more housing into our city. So that's a distinction that it would be good if you could kind of talk about as a council as well.
The number one
goes with number 2 is what type of development or redevelopment is appropriate. And, I think of that, well, together with number 4, I guess I'll talk about that. The economic growth and development of Midvale, I view it as the single family home. They do bring a lot of, you could say, stability. People are buying there and staying for a long period of time in the city. So there is some value in that. Back on point 2, development and redevelopment. Looking at our general plan, it seems to be that some of the major roadways, the arteries there, is where I view that as where that should be appropriate to redevelop. And I think we have it zoned that way with commercial overlays or duplex overlays. so that as you're getting these main roads, you see some of that redevelopment. Now, I recognize if people live right there, they may not find that very popular, but I think that's the general plan that we worked on for a significant period of time. That's what came out of that. As you get further away from those main roads, I think we would want to try to keep the single family homes as they are without increasing that density. That's my thoughts on that.
Is that, as you make these comments, if other council members could kind of weigh in on whether they agree with that or not, it would be helpful.
I mean, I kind of agree with that, depending on how we define like a main road. You know, State Street to an extent, yes, but I don't know if Main or Center, even though we kind of consider them main roads, are in the same vein as like 7th or 7200.
Yeah.
You know, if that makes sense, Quinn.
Well,
Yep.
plus I think the size also kind of matters as well. Some of these roads coming off State Street are extremely narrow. So to put in 12 units with, you know, very limited parking as we've done, I feel like you're just putting even more pressure on the residents around it. They're going to fight it even more.
Yeah, because the townhomes by me, there's 33 townhomes. The biggest complaint was parking. And Roosevelt is now a one-way street because everyone parks on it. That was never that problem at Roosevelt for as long as I've driven down there for 8 years beforehand. Everyone said it was going to be a problem. And sure enough, it was a problem. I mean, it's exactly how every neighbor viewed it. And so even though Center is, you know, quote unquote, more of a main road, the complex dumps right onto Roosevelt, and almost literally every single day, vehicles wait on sort of Altaview and Center and wave each other through because it's now too narrow for a road. I do it every single day. So, you know, even though it's close to a main road, we've kind of really hurt a lot of our residents just as they projected.
Well,
Well,
I think,
the
ahead.
number one things that our citizens keep telling me, and as I go around and I get calls, is that they don't want less single family homes. Every development that we've had recently is higher density, either taller, whatever, and over half of our city is that type of development. So they're becoming very frustrated that we're losing single family homes and getting more higher density development. Now, obviously, I mean, we're still providing a lot of high density development. Jordan Bluffs and all of those areas are providing these types of development. Our citizens want us to be respectful of the single family homes and keep their neighborhoods looking like they are right now. And if they're going to develop them, they want to have them torn down if they have to be, and single family homes put back in those areas, or the duplexes. They don't want more than, and that's my frustration, is that we are allowing more than that. And I think we need to protect our single family homes. And what we do, if somebody wants to do a PUD, somehow we've got to make it so that if it comes before the council, we can say yes or no. Either they have to rezone it to do it or whatever, but it doesn't do us any good to have a public hearing and not be able to say yes or no. It just doesn't work.
I agree with that. I think the biggest frustration I have is trying to tell people, try to explain, you know, what these administrative things are and the things that come to us that we still need to vote on anyway, that we're told behind the scenes that we can't vote no on it. So it seems like just a dog and pony show. And that's what causes a lot of frustration to not only us as council members and most likely the mayor as well, but frustration to the folks who have to live with these developments for the next 20 or 30 or 40 years. So it's just a difficult position for us to be in to try to explain, you know, administrative versus legislative is an easy explanation, but then people wonder why we have the public hearing, why we have the votes from the planning commission, why we have the votes from city council.
Right.
Yeah, if we have if we can't do anything, it looks like we're fools because they expect us to be able to do something and vote one way or another, and we're not able to.
Okay. Any other comments on these questions or this discussion?
Nate, I have one more thought that I've been kind of bringing up since I've been on council is I think one thing we really need to look at is sort of modernizing these single family zones. And as an aside, is single family zone the right term to use? I mean, I could have my parents come live with me and there's 2 families in there. I don't like the term single family home. It doesn't even really apply. You know,
Well,
I think
a single family detached home, I guess, is the, you know.
or like just low density, just because I could have my parents come live with me for free. You guys can't tell me no. That's 2 families. But, you know, I've had plenty of people leave the neighborhood that said, hey, if the setback was just 5 feet less, I could put a garage on my house. You know, if I could do 2 stories instead of 1.5 stories, I would do that instead of leaving, because a lot of people purchased at a pretty low rate. In most areas of Midvale, now Midvale's catching up in costs. So people, if they could, you know, build out to a more modern home, they would and stay. And I think we should encourage that. I also think that could help with the economic growth because, you know, if you're adding 1,000 square feet to a home, right, that should add more in property taxes overall, right, for valuations.
Right.
So I don't know if we necessarily always need to look at, hey, how do we, you know, for quote unquote redevelopment, how does it become more dense? We could look at it, how does it become more modern? And that includes setbacks and height and all that, you know, because, you know, these 1,000 square foot driveways, we don't need them. But just the way our setbacks are, everyone has these humongo driveways that are single lane, you know.
So allowing more density, but still only allowing detached houses. I mean, adding second stories, adding garages, but still saying it has to be a single family home. Or
yeah, so it's not really necessarily adding density or not. It's just adding the ability to do a little bit more with your property.
Well, what I meant is adding density onto your current home.
Yes, yeah.
Basically square footage.
Yeah, square footage. Adding square footage.
You're not adding any density. You're not adding another unit or anything like that. You're just adding more square footage to the units. And there's a lot of, like, when I was in Denver, my daughter rented a house and it was by the university. They actually sold the house, and this house sold for about $600,000, and they came back in and put a $2 million house on that same piece of property. So, I mean, not that they'll do that in Midvale, but that's what we want, is we want people to update their homes so that they can stay here without having to move somewhere else.
Let me move on to the third part of the discussion, which is what we're going to do is we're just going to go through these lists of ideas really quick. And by really quick, I mean really quick. We'll each take a turn doing that.
This may be something that's going to be on your list, but I just have it on my mind based on what Bryant was saying with the townhomes by his neighborhood and the parking issue. And that the parking issue is not unique to that development, right? We hear that throughout various areas, and it's usually dealing with a multifamily project.
Yeah.
And I recognize we've got our parking, I guess, formula that goes into that. And people say that, well, there's not an issue with single family because single family usually has a longer driveway where they can park the additional cars. In these other developments, if they're using their garage as storage and they don't have a large driveway to park their cars, that's where they're parking on the street. And I mean, I guess one strategy is if you're trying to still have development but decrease some of the density, is it possible to build in something with the parking I don't know, you change that somehow where if they're not going to have a driveway like in a townhome project that's large enough that they can park cars on the driveway, then somehow they have to have more visitor parking, right? So that they're not just pushing them out onto the streets of the neighborhood. So that something else we could look at. I know that's definitely not going to be popular amongst developers because they're going to lose money, but that's going to address the parking issue that we have in our neighborhood.
Okay. So we're going to go through these really quick. What I'm going to do, since there's not going to be enough time for you to say which ones you like or don't like, what I'm actually going to do is put all of these different ideas on a survey that I'm going to send out to council, and you can just select the ones that you want us to research more. And then when we come back, we'll go through that list and we'll start doing the research on these different concepts. So we're going to start with Alex. He's going to go through these. We're just going to do these really quick.
Okay, so we've got about like 15 of these, so that's why we have to go fast. The first, when we could look at making some tweaks to the existing language or removing them entirely from the existing zones. This would be something like the parking or the architecture or the open space, just massaging the numbers that we have. Second, we could create different requirements by neighborhood, or even potentially look at establishing a larger set of low density residential districts. So instead of having 2.5, maybe we need like 4 or 6 or 8 or something, just based on community needs or neighborhood needs. We could look at turning MPDs or PUDs into a legislative action by mandating maybe an overlay zone or a development agreement to approve them. We could also start kind of almost as part of the second one or an extension of the second one, looking at what sort of areas need to have small area plans and use those to drive decisions about where different development styles are appropriate.
Jason's up. Make sure to unmute.
Hello, my name is Jason. I'm a new planner with Midvale. I've been here about a month, so I'm a new face, and hopefully I'll get to meet you when coronavirus is over. I've been in city planning for about 3 years, but I'm new to the area, so they've asked me to be very general, and because I don't have much experience in Midvale, I have noticed a couple of things that may be valuable here. So let's go through these 4 strategies. In your 2019 housing element, and your 2016 general plan, you mention neighborhoods of opportunity and areas of opportunity, but they're not defined. So they're very fuzzy, and that provides some flexibility to staff, to the council, and to the developers to come in and propose a project, and then we get some leeway to interpret that and then make a recommendation. So one of the things you could do, council could do, is perhaps more exactly define where those neighborhoods of opportunity are in order to isolate growth in the areas that you'd like. Another opportunity would be talking about buffer requirements. Right now, we take a look at density massing scale facade and apply that to its location in between perhaps commercial, multifamily, and single family residential, and then we make a recommendation. Those aren't defined. If they were defined very clearly, you might have a little bit more control on where these types of MPDs are being developed. Another idea along that way is specific block locations for these MPDs. So not just in those gray areas of neighborhoods of opportunity, but actually define them geographically. Perhaps mid-block is not where you want to see a fourplex in a single family neighborhood, but perhaps corner lots would be a little bit more appropriate, or major intersections or secondary types of roads, or maybe even a mile, a quarter mile from transit. Just some ideas, better geolocate the areas you would like these MPDs to be developed. And then finally, along the lines of what Councilman Glover was saying, when a developer comes in with a fourplex, for example, they provide a home product that is I guess you could say it's urban, chic, modern, different materials, different faceting, different bulk. And that may not go well with a traditional single family home or a neighborhood that was developed in the 50s and 60s. So it does kind of stick out and it's different and it causes some concern. So 4 quick ideas from someone who hasn't been in the city, but has been in different cities and sees these kinds of things.
Great. Jenna's going to take us through this.
Okay, so this is based on the recently adopted housing plan, just maybe visiting some of these specific topics and really things that we've already passed and agreed upon in that plan. So for instance, ADU expansion kind of speaks to what we talked about of like providing different options for homeowners that are already there, being able to build a second unit that is going to be primarily occupied by the current owner. We talked about parking in the housing plan. It's mostly about reducing parking, but maybe finding ways to really utilize shared parking. Setbacks and open space is something we currently are looking at and something that could benefit a single family homeowner. And then these by right and subdivision process again are in the housing plan are aimed at lowering the obstacles and making it easier for people to do things. So really looking into what our intentions are and how you're going to work with these strategies in the housing plan. Residential compatibility overlay zone is something Mill Creek City uses, where it's just an overlay that regulates building height, setback, and lot coverage, kind of like a 3D footprint of a building that can have a larger height setback farther, or you kind of just meet this 3D concept. And then tree preservation sometimes can speak to residents as far as like that impact of development and that privacy when we don't have anything with tree preservation at this time.
Okay. Some other ideas. One of the concept that's out there is called these FAR standards, which is the floor area ratio. And that's really where you take a lot size and you have a set ratio of how much square feet you can put on that lot. It's sometimes a good idea to use, especially when you're getting, we have a lot of these very long lots that aren't very utilized well. We don't necessarily like flag lots, but sometimes that's the only way to utilize those properties. But putting in these FAR standards helps determine how much square feet could you really even put on a given parcel. And then here's one, I'm a finance guy, so I'm going to always end with the finance one. Reviewing the financial incentives and disincentives that we have in place. And so this is really going through, and what you have the ability to do is evaluate how much it costs for you to put in development, how much staff time goes into it. What I always think is good is to do a study and figure out how much staff time is this really costing you? Are the developers paying their way in terms of what the staff is working on? I think it's always good to do a study every 5 years or 5 to 7 years to figure out how much it costs. Council always has the discretion to decide we're going to collect 100% of that cost. We're going to collect 80%. We're going to collect, 50%. Sometimes with a nonprofit, we might waive some of those development fees. And also going along with that, something that the legislature allows is impact fees. And so you can charge those for public safety, for street impacts, for park impacts, for stormwater impacts. They're very restrictive on what you can charge those for, but that is a way of having the developers pay their way for the overall infrastructure of the city that their new development is putting on the city. Midvale doesn't charge any impact fees. That is going to act as an incentive for developers because it costs less to develop here. So another thing that I like to do is, whether you ever want to charge impact fees or not, I always like to have a baseline study that says this is how much developments are actually costing the city in terms of service and infrastructure. And then it's always up to council whether they charge impact fees. but I think it's good that you know how much a development might be costing a community. Some other just things, we're open to any other ideas. So the parking idea that was brought up, any of those ideas that we could look at in terms of looking at what other cities are doing. This is an issue that every city across the country deals with. It's not unique to Midvale, but looking at what other cities have done in terms of best practices, we can compare it to cities. We could actually take a change. If you recommend making such and such a change, we could actually go to some of these developments that have been approved in the past and say, okay, what would have that change have done to this development if it was in place? Would it have achieved the goal that we wanted it to do? And then of course, we're always open to any requests that you have. Like I said, what I want to do is kind of I've written down notes on the different items that you talked about, and I think I kind of have a general idea on how you feel about these zones and changes. I kind of want to put those into some objective statements so that you can see those and kind of say, we agree to these, or we don't agree to these, or we need to tweak these a little bit. And then, like I said, I want to put together a list of all those items that we just went through, and we'll add a little bit of description to them. Send that out to you in a link on a survey, and you can just click next to ones that you think are good ideas or not good ideas, so that staff can narrow in on some of these things. We got limited staff and we have limited resources. We would love to develop every idea and figure out if they work, but the more you indicate to us which ones you like, it'll be better for us, and we could dig into those in a little more detail. And so I'll send that out. And then our plan is to come back very soon, within the next month or month and a half, with the ideas that you like, with those objective statements, and take this to step 2, which is, okay, what would these ideas do? How do we put them in place? And what's the next step in actually taking legislative action to put these into place to get these zones where we want? That's kind of the end of our presentation. The hour went very fast, as I thought it would go. So any other comments on the tactic that we're kind of taking, or the strategies that how we're dealing with this process? We would welcome any of those.
I guess my question is it appropriate to put a moratorium on these planned unit developments until we actually come up with a strategy legislative that what to do here?
Yeah, and I think putting a moratorium can be a good tool if we agree that we need to do something. What we don't want to do is put a moratorium on there and then in 6 months come back and say, well, we actually like the way that the zones are, and we're not going to really make very many changes to those. Then that moratorium really just starts to look like a way of stopping developers from developing, which I think would hurt us at the state level.
Well, my opinion is that we need to do something. I'm not happy with what we've done. And so I think personally, on my end of it, we need to do something. I don't know if anybody else agrees with me.
I agree.
I absolutely agree.
I think if someone has put an application in, we can't retroactively change the law on them, right?
No,
No.
but if they haven't put an application in, then we can set a moratorium, and it goes for a maximum of 6 months. So
yeah.
Then
So
we have to.
I just wanted to be clear that it wouldn't be for anyone that currently has an application. It would be for everyone after that, right? Councilman Glover?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
And let me clarify, what exactly do you want to put a moratorium on?
The multi planned units.
Okay, so is it specifically any MPD, or is it the allowed use of multifamily? The clause within in the MPD that says you could do multifamily units.
In the
Right,
single family area?
It's a single family, your 3 or 2.5 areas for now. Any units planned that way, we'd like to put a moratorium on, not the rest of the city.
But do you specifically want to put it on MPDs altogether within the single family, or do you want it just be on the multifamily clause within there?
I think the second makes more sense.
And I'm probably going to want to ask Lisa if that is legal for us to put it on one single clause within an MPD.
I would have to look at that. I'm not sure that we can. I don't know that that's a proper criteria to put a moratorium on.
But could we put a moratorium on the MPD clause within single family residence?
I think so. I think we need to look at that.
Okay. So
That would be okay with me. And hopefully we don't take 6 months to do this. I'd like to get it resolved and figure out how to do this in a reasonable time for our developers and for our city residents.
Yeah, I agree with Councilman Glover, and I just want to say I'm open to any idea. The only idea I don't love would be to add more zones. I think that adds more confusion to all neighbors, and you know, us voting on that, we could unintentionally pit each other against each other by say, you know, this part should be in SF1, this should be SF2, this should be SF3. I personally would rather limit it to just a few, so we don't have to try to explain, you know, 4 or 5 zones to every constituent that's upset about a development, if that makes sense. That's my personal.
From what I heard consensus that we want to put a moratorium on MPDs within single family zones. I think let us do a little bit of research on how specific we can be, and if we could narrow that any more specifically, so that we're not, because there is a lot of flexibility and there sometimes is benefits to having an MPD done within these zones. Let us come back and tell you what level of specificity we can get into on that. But it sounds to me like we're on the right track. We want to develop some of these things further, and we'll come back as soon as possible, which I think will be in the next month, a month and a half. But we'll come back at the next council meeting with a resolution to put a moratorium on that. Because that's what I think I got consensus from everyone on council. Is that correct? I think the only one I didn't hear from was maybe Quinn, but I might have just not heard.
I don't love the idea of a moratorium, but I'm okay with it.
Okay, well, that's the direction that we'll take. I'll send out that survey. I'll explain it. And then mark those things. That'll come out this week. And we'll go from there, and we'll keep moving this as fast as we can with the limited staff that we have. But thanks for the discussion. I thought it was a good discussion, and we got.
Hey, Nate, real quick, can we do a moratorium and not do a full 6 months? It doesn't need to be 6 months, right? It can be less.
We can always end it sooner than the 6 months.
Yeah, so I don't think 6 months is appropriate. I would be more inclined for a 3-month moratorium. I don't think we need a full half of a year to do that.
I think you can set it wherever you want. It's just the limit is 6 months.
That the state sets it at 6 months.
Yeah.
So we can do it as fast as we can actually get it done, which is what I said I think is appropriate.
Okay.
Let me clarify that then. Do we want it to come back and say 6 months, or do we want it to say 3 months, knowing that you could extend it at the end of that 3 months for another 3? I think it would send a message you want to do it quick, and you're not trying to prohibit developers by doing it in 3 months.
My only question is what the staff thinks they can get it done in.
Depends on how many marks if you guys go through the survey and you mark every single one, then it's going to take us 2 years probably to go through it. But if you're specific, or if you decide to give us more resources, and we can do it faster, but we're going to do it as fast as we can.
All right, is that everything, Nate?
That's all I've got.
Council, good discussion. Thanks, Nate, to you and your team. Okay, it's 7 o'clock and time to begin. I want to welcome everybody that's listening in. Welcome the city council, staff, and others that are participating in today's city council meeting. It's nice to be in an air-conditioned office or home today. It sure was warm. First thing we're going to do is ask Chief Thomas. He can manipulate that flag in his cameras. Good job. All right, let's all stand and give a pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. See, Chief, you could almost use my tie there.
You got it next time.
All right, pull my agenda down a little bit. Rory, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Councilmember Robinson,
Here.
Gettle,
Here.
Brown,
Here.
Barry,
Here.
and Glover.
Here.
Good, we're all here. We'll move to the next item and ask Chief Thomas to give a report on the Unified Police, and then who we got from Fire Department? Oh, there's Brad. Hello, Brad. We'll catch you right after Chief Thomas, okay? All right, Chief.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I did get a preliminary report on some of our stats. However, I didn't have enough to completely the report. And plus, I'd like to include the financials when we get those, because those will be fiscal year end. Obviously, just awaiting audit. So we did do 910 cases last month as compared to May, where we had 971 cases. So we're trending right where we anticipate we typically are. Last year, we had 1,003. So we're actually down a little bit from the year previous, but back in 2018, we were right at 926. So we've got a really good, almost predictable case trend where we're, if it stays the course, next month, July, or current month will be our busy month at just over 1,000 cases. And by looking at some of the social media, it looks like July started off with a bang. So that's a joke. I don't hear any laughing, so that's okay. Just want to kind of point out some of our, at Lifestart Village, we had our shelter resource officer, Mark Utley, who used to be our Hillcrest High SRO. He did some amazing work down there. And I might've pointed this out last time, but we got a chance to go down there and acknowledge some of the commercial vendors that chipped in and helped them with some donations, that being from Home Depot, Prism Paint, which is one of our local vendors, and Walmart. They all chipped in, helped out with Lifestart Village. The detectives repainted both of the nurseries. They hand painted some murals on the inside there. It's really a nice environment. And then also down at the road home, we were able to secure through donation a shed that they can use as an outbuilding for temporary storage. And as you know, the road home often needs that. So it was kind of nice to be able to take some of the vendors or local community vendors that pitched in when asked and helped us out, and in essence helped us with that. It was a great deal. I was able to take Lori Shaw, which is our office supervisor, last week, and the mayor up to our range and get a little bit of a tour of the sheriff's office range and the back room with the armory, talk to some of our armors and range staff, as well as go up into the Vertra machine and shoot, basically get to see some of the force on force training that we go through. And I'm sure the mayor has some comments on that, but it's really interesting to see civilian untrained people go through those scenarios versus police officers when we watch, and muscle memory and some of the reactions are quite different. So
I know you'll never take me on a raid, Chief.
I never said that. I thought it, but I never said that. But no, it was a good experience, and it was a good afternoon. Specifically, Lori had never even been up to our range, and for as long as she's worked for us, I thought it real appropriate we get her up there and kind of show her something she's never seen before. And she is a heck of a shot, so you don't ever want to get in her way. I just kind of want to make some comments regarding some of the social media I've watched, and in particular, some concerns on Lennox and Holden. And I know even through open council in the past years, we've had the same complaints regarding speed. I think Councilman Gettle was involved in this, some of the gathering some of the stats on this. We have done enforcement in the area. It is a continuous cause, and we will continue to work on it. I want to thank Glenn over at Public Works, because the speed indicator sign does collect data, and it did show that, on average, you're probably 25 to 30 miles an hour coming through that residential area. And obviously it's posted at 25. So there's also some nuisance issues that we're working on. So that's not being ignored, it's being addressed. And I hope, Councilman Gettle, I hope we're getting back to you with enough information that it helps any of your constituents with. Another thing we've seen or heard of is a lot of the loud mufflers and racing. That's a continuous, it's warm out. We're hearing all the motorcycles, the Harleys, the bullet bikes, the race cars, especially on the weekends. We're doing our best on those. We got a good traffic stop on a bullet bike just the other day in front of Sportsman, and the guy was just out playing. Ironically, it's where we pulled him over was in the parking lot where a couple of years ago we actually had a dispatcher that was on his personal motorcycle and was in a fatal accident. So it is a season, a lot of motorcyclists out there without their helmets on. So we're doing as much enforcement on that as we can. Fireworks, I don't know what to say. They were more spectacular than I've ever seen. And I'm not talking about the ones that Midvale paid for. I'm talking about just the legal stuff that I saw shot off, not only my neighborhood, but across the valley. I'm very thankful, and I'm sure Chief Larson probably saw the same. I didn't hear of any major fires in the valley. And we're not out of the woods yet, as warm and dry and windy as it is. We're still there. I want to mention, kind of on a sad note, our victim advocate, Carmen Contreras, who does incredible work for our, not only just all of our victims of domestic violence, but specifically has a connection with the Hispanic community. Her father passed away a few days ago. She's obviously very heartbroken, so she's offline. We'll be taking care of her father and taking care of arrangements for him. So our hearts go out to her. She's a special person to all of us. I did a very, very late notice of a Cops and Coffee this last Saturday. We had a gentleman that showed up, and we let him decide when the next event would be, which it's going to be this Saturday in the evening over at just north of the Boys and Girls Club in the park. And what we're going to do, there's no agenda. There's no specific talking point, but it's just a chance for people to come out and meet their police officers. I'm going to load up a cooler full of Otter Pops. We're going to try to do shaved ice, and that turned into, I just had nightmares about it. So Otter Pops are something we can hand out, and we can use social distancing. And if we get a handful of people, that's a handful more than we had in the first place. But I actually did distribute some of the stuff to put out on posting on social media, and that would be something I'd invite any of the council or government to show up, even the fire station. Happy to have you. This is just a discussion, anything you want to discuss. We had a great time Saturday morning. It was early enough to where that coffee helped kick in and make Saturday productive for some of us. But other than that, I really don't have anything more to brief council on. If council has any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Chief, the folks who posted on social media about Lennox, they wrote to me and just to say how completely happy and satisfied they were with your response and the response of your officers. So just wanted to close that loop for you. Whatever you did out there, they certainly appreciated.
Well, thank you. As you know, I missed your first email to me. It was still stuck in my inbox. And when I saw that you were waiting for me, I came right to you. And I
thought it was odd that you didn't reply that day. I was like, oh, maybe he does get a day off here and there.
Yeah.
But,
No, I like to get right back and not let that stuff sit. So I'm glad they're satisfied. There's still some ongoing issues we're dealing with, and we're in direct contact with them. So I appreciate the feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Chief,
you, Council.
This is Councilman Brown. I just want to say thank you for, emailing me quite a bit the last couple of days. I'm sure I'll have more questions that we can sort of iron out and discuss. But one thing in general, it seems like my area has had 2 drive-by shootings in the last 30 days. Are they within a mile of each other? Is this, hopefully it's not a pattern. Are they gang related? Are the 2 of them related?
They don't appear to be related. And I was assuming with the
chief's frozen for me. Is he for the rest of you?
last one that I emailed you, the Watch Metro Gang domestic dispute, it's a little ironic. It was as close to the last one. So generally the drive-bys are gang related. That's just the reality of it. They're happening valley-wide. I don't, kind of towards the south end of your district, there's areas where we will see them. We do our best to stay on top of the intel and figure those out. But those 2 don't appear to be related, and the closeness of the time frame is more coincidental, I believe. But we're actually seeing them valley-wide or agency-wide, specifically out west also.
All right, thanks. Thank you. That stinks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Chief Larson.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. Chief Thomas, you stole my line. I was gonna start out something like that with the 4th, and you stole my thunder. Well, I thought that was funny.
Yeah, mine wasn't funny either. Sorry, Brad.
It's like cricket. I think before I get into our activities over last Friday, Saturday on the 4th, I'll jump into our quarterly report and just go over that briefly. Let's see, I'll share my screen here. If I can figure out how to do this. There we go. Okay. Can everyone see that okay? All right. I'll just go over this briefly. These are our our second quarter report for the year. I want you to keep in mind the number of total incidents up there at 778 is incorrect. The correct number is 817, which is reflected down below for the quarter 2020 right here where my cursor is. Our software company, they're still trying to figure that out, why that doesn't match up. But the important thing to remember is our numbers are 817 for the last 3 months. A situation found, this just gives us a good idea of kind of help us improve our dispatching as far as asking questions and getting answers on what type of call we're going on. You'll notice that the situation found or dispatched as, EMS calls are 685, hazmat 14, service 9, and so on across the line. And then it gives a percentage of total calls that those represented. Then when the fire crew actually got to the incident, the actual situation was different than that which was dispatched. For example, let's take the hazardous materials. That got dispatched as a hazmat call 14 times, and when they actually got on scene, down below was actually only 17. This just helps us be more accurate in our reporting on the National Fire Incident Reporting System, and helps us in our future planning just to have more accurate numbers. The early incident counts, you can see 2019 count there. Of course, we won't have 2020 for a while. Top five fire dispatches. The structure fire were 6 for the quarter. Outside fires were 3 for the quarter. That's going to go up given last weekend on the next quarterly report, and so on. The top 5 medical descriptions that we were dispatched on. A sick person, that could be anywhere from a diabetic problem, COVID calls perhaps, or some other illness. And of course, falls is always quite high in the Midvale area. This is comparatively incidents by municipality. Midvale at 817. So again, we always rank up in the top 3. Your fire crews are pretty busy. This this one is used a lot by our command staff for improving our turnout time. In other words, the time we receive the call till the time it's dispatched to the station, they put on their gear, get in the engine, and respond and arrive at the scene. I think the table that's the most telling here, that's easiest to understand, is the top one here. We'll take this middle column here in the blue, 102 calls. We arrived 6 minutes or less. That's from the time the call was taken till the time the crew got to the scene. 7 minutes or less was 98 of the calls of the total of the quarter, and so on. And as you get to 8 minutes and up to 12, keep in mind that some of these are, they respond 1040 without lights and sirens. So it may be a non-emergent call, or they were slowed to 1040 before they got to the scene due to arrival of another unit. This incoming engines and trucks and incoming ambulances is interesting. These are all responses within Midvale. So your station 125 and 126, 428 times into Midvale, and 394 into Midvale. And these other numbers down below here with Cottonwood Heights, Taylorsville, East Riverton, Kearns, and so on are the times that they sent units into Midvale. So for the quarter, for example, Cottonwood Heights sent units into Midvale 18 times. The same holds for the incoming ambulances. Your ambulance 126, 696 responses in Midvale. Station 110 in Cottonwood Heights, which is just east of Fort Union up there, came in to assist 58, sent 58 units in during the quarter. The next is the number of times that the Midvale units went out into other areas. Of course, the number 822 there for Midvale corresponds with the 428 and the 394 incoming. It adds up to 822, of course, so that number should be the same. But we went to assist in West Jordan. 35 of our units went in during the quarter, 26 times into Murray, 22 into Cottonwood Heights, and so on. And the same stat is for the outgoing ambulances. Our ambulance went into Cottonwood Heights 67 times in the quarter, 11 times into Holiday, and so on. So that gives us a good idea of our mutual response, the number of times other units come in to help us and the times that we go out to help them. Top 5 other dispatches. This just gives us the other calls that we went on and the number of times. Okay, are there any questions on any of those? Okay,
Chief, I actually have a question. Sorry, I was
it's okay.
trying to hit the right buttons here. Here I am. So back to that slide. Does it seem that we're a little bit more generous in the number of times we send our response teams out versus other communities sending theirs in?
Yeah, and that can vary from month to month, you know.
Okay.
It's dynamic. I mean, we can look at the numbers long term. It really helps us during the board meetings and budgeting and those type of things when we're looking at all those numbers as a whole for the board members to talk about, to make sure that, you know, things are fair and equitable. However, keep in mind that a lot of those are UFA units. You know, they come out of Cottonwood Heights, they come out of Mill Creek. And the same as when we go in to assist them. For example, some of the large field fires or house fires that we may have here in Midvale, we've got plenty of resources to pull from. So it's a real advantage that way. And departments all across this valley have mutual aid agreements. And there's always the question of, well, we're sending more here, but next year that might change. So we just have to kind of keep an eye on that and make sure that you know, isn't a burden on the community we're based in.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that does. Thank you for that. I know you've shown us those numbers before, but that really jumped out at me this time versus other times. So,
yeah, and it may next time too. We'll just have to kind of keep an eye on it.
okay. And it does make sense. I think in the back of my mind anyway, I know which communities are UPD communities. I don't necessarily know all of the UFA cities off the top of my head. So that could be something for me to do.
For example, we have a ladder truck for Midvale within 5 minutes up at Station 110. With all the new development and the low-rise buildings going in down in the river bottoms, we need a ladder truck. We can have it there just very quickly. So it helps save on apparatus costs, but it also keeps a unit within reasonable response time, our goal, 5 minutes to get where it needs to be.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. The other question I had, just with your monthly and quarterly stats, do you guys also track outcomes of the cases? Because I'd be interested to see. I don't think a lot of people understand just exactly what you guys see, you know, when you go out on some of these responses, whether they're, you know, people who were completely unresponsive that you brought back to a responsive state, or, you know, the opposite of someone who, you know, you guys went out on a call and they were dead. You know, I think those numbers are interesting to have, but also, you know, they're useful to the community who would then realize, like, oh my God, these people aren't just going out for, you know, someone who had, you know, a diabetic shock episode, which is not a non-emergent thing. Please continue to call for that. But just so we know as a community, the various things that you guys and your team are actually doing.
Yeah, I try to reach out to the stations before the meetings to ask them if they have anything significant that they would like to share. And I think what I'm going to try and do in the future is maybe get a crew here once a month, once every 2 months, and maybe talk about some of those things. It's a little bit challenging for me where I'm not involved in the day-to-day operations, which I wish I could be. So I will really reach out to them, maybe even a little more than I have, and see if there are anything. A couple of times I've called, they really couldn't think of anything other than some public education events that they'd have been involved in, and things of that nature. So I totally get what you're saying, and it really makes sense. So I'll see what I can do on that end for you.
Okay, appreciate it as always.
Yeah. Okay, fireworks. Whoa, we anticipated a significant increase in consumer fireworks people shooting from home this year because of COVID and other things, but mostly COVID. And, you know, a lot of cities canceled. I know Midvale, you guys had a shoot. I know a couple other cities did, but it was pretty lean this year as far as the public shoots go. But I was on a hill on the west side and I could see into West Jordan, West Valley. I could see South Salt Lake, all of the South Jordan, West Jordan, clear up into Draper. And there was more fireworks being shot off than I can ever remember. And I really anticipated some disasters, but a couple of things I think really helped us. And I don't have the numbers for all of the UFA responses yet, but I'll talk about some of the Midvale numbers here in a second. A couple of things really helped us. One was the temperature dropped to 75 degrees and the humidity was 30% or higher. That makes a huge difference with ignition in an open field, for example. It may not seem like much, but it makes a big difference versus being 85, 90 degrees and the humidity at 10%. The ignition occurs a lot easier. So that was one thing in our favor during the night. That was on the 4th. The other thing is that we had our information outreach just do a huge media blitz on safety and concerns that we had. We had 191 different media mentions last week alone. That's TV slots, radio slots, blogs, and other media venues. So we really tried to get the word out to the public. We had maps of the restricted areas for the entire county, for entire Salt Lake County. That was done by our emergency management, printed those up. And they were at all the fireworks vendors' sites. There was little, I forget what the little computerized barcode kind of thing is on the map. If somebody knows, you can shout it out. Someone could put their phone on that and it would pull up our interactive map on their phone. And yes, that's right. Thank you. We had 25,000 visits to our fireworks page and map on our website. 25,000 visits, plus 6,000 views of safety articles that we had on our website. So I think those things really, really helped. And as Chief mentioned, we didn't have some huge events. Mostly what I heard going out being dispatched were small outside fires or a large outside fire. And in Midvale, I believe there were 8 over the Friday and Saturday night. I think 7 of them or so were dispatched as small outside fires. And mostly what they were was brush and bushes next to a home that had caught fire from fireworks. One caught into a pine tree. Our crew got there, put the fire out, and then used their thermal imaging to make sure that the roof and the attic did not have any fire or heat in them from that. A couple others caught into some bushes next to some homes, and they were mostly out by the time our crews got there. One was in a dumpster in an apartment complex. I'm sure it was discarded fireworks. Another was a garbage can next to a garage. That might have been in just over the border in Taylorsville that the crew helped respond to. So overall in Midvale, there were just a few incidents. I think for the 24th, we're going to send some information out to Laura so that she can get out to make sure that when people shoot off their aerials, they have them well braced. Because a couple of the incidences in Midvale happened when the aerials tipped over and shot into a weed and a grass pile and another into some bushes. So that's one thing I think we'll do. And then to make sure that they douse them in a bucket overnight before they put it in their garbage. So overall, I mean, I was nervous as a cat all night, but I feel very fortunate that we didn't have some large events given the huge number of home fireworks that went off. I think I've hit on everything there, so I will end with that and ask if there are any questions for me.
Are cats pretty nervous creatures?
I'm sorry?
I said, are cats pretty nervous creatures? You said nervous as a cat. I've never heard that before.
Well, you know, if you catch a cat hollering at it when they don't know you're there, I mean, they'll jump up onto the ceiling almost.
That's
and,
true. Okay, I get it now. That makes
yeah.
sense.
So, yeah, I was pretty nervous. I always am. You know, my wife tells me I need some Valium or something, but
Just sleep through July 4th next year.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Chief. I know there's citizens. I've received emails on fireworks complaining about them, and we leave that up to the legislature.
Yeah.
To find everything about them, and we just have to make sure the area that down by the river is off limits.
Yeah, it shows in the restricted area on the map quite well. I should mention also that we have staff from fire prevention out patrolling that night to help educate and hopefully deter. We also had our investigators out. We also had our wildland crew out. We had a couple extra grass truck units out help patrol in the areas and be invisible. And I think that helps a little bit too.
Well, the wildland certainly was busy the week before that.
Yes, they were.
Thank you, Chief.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to all your crews.
I'll tell them, thank you.
You bet. All right, we need now to move to our next section and accept any public comments. So Laura, Rory, whoever is accepting the public comments, what have you found?
That'll be me tonight, Mayor. I have nothing on Facebook and YouTube, but there were a couple of emails that were sent out to the council. Mayor, I believe you received one. If you'd like me to read those.
Yes.
Okay. The first one is from Lorraine Butler. To be read for the record, please. To the mayor, city council members, staff, developers, and other interested parties. This is a time of heightened angst and concern in our country and our community. I am sure you have heard the voices speaking against major changes to how we develop our communities. Citizens from Harriman to Erta, Lehigh to Bountiful, St. George to Logan, all along our great state, communities are seeing open spaces, agricultural farms, and Bureau of Land Management sites rise in development of large proportions. Citizens are asking, why is it happening? How did it happen? And who is responsible? And can we stop it? A former gubernatorial candidate and realty company owner commented in a recent debate about the not in my backyard mentality among the citizens and suggested that there is a better way to manage growth. I concur, there is a better way. Our master plan has been restructured and revised over the years, and the sagacity of the governing bodies, I don't know if I said that right, have been far off the reality that exists. We hear the terms affordable housing, TOD, transit-oriented development, multifamily housing, duplex overlay, etc., from planners, developers, and government. We hear the words homes, neighborhoods, green space, swimming pools, and community from those who have chosen to live in Midvale. Housing is costly. Many apartments are not well taken care of. Green space, parks, baseball diamonds, swimming pools, tennis or pickleball courts are removed, reduced, or ignored. Note that some are closed due to COVID-19. Neighborhoods that have even a small parcel of undeveloped land live with the fear that a multi-story dwelling will be built on them. Items 1 to 3 in Mr. Rockwood's document are critical points for Midvale City and its residents. Mr. Murphy's document for the change in zoning to favor RM25 states, it will allow the project to serve as a buffer between Fort Union and the nearby neighborhoods, insulating them from the higher intensity along the corridor. What kind of buffering is a multiple floor housing complex next to a neighborhood? Buffer means to lessen the shock, not worsen the situation. The RM25 developments lessen no shock. the neighborhood feel ends up being destroyed. Your constituents and your employers, taxpayers, want you to discuss this topic, protect the neighborhoods, and have keen judgment so that Midvale may grow harmoniously from border to border. Thank you for your time and attention, Lorraine Butler. Okay, and then I have another one from Mr. Wade Walker, asking Laura to comment on this. And he says, I'm disappointed in the City Council's failure to make a decision on UPD last week. The issue has been discussed for well over a year now, ever since last year's huge cost increase. The decision the decision needs to be made now, one way or the other. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Unlike the pygmy goat issue, which dragged on for weeks, longer than it needed to, this issue actually costs us money when we don't decide. With Taylorsville announcement that it is leaving UPD, we are on a sinking ship, one that will continue to cost more and more as UPD spreads its cost over fewer and fewer municipalities. I've lived in Midvale for nearly my entire life, and I feel the time is right to go back to having a Midvale Police Department. When we had our own police force, the police seemed to be more responsive. They knew the area, the residents knew several of the police officers, and the police were directly responsible to the city government. The closer the police are to the people they serve, the better service we'll get. Thanks, Wade Walker. That's all I've got, Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much, Rory.
You bet.
All right, we'll now move to council reports and begin with Council Member Quinn Sperry.
I have nothing this evening.
Okay, we'll move to Council Member Heidi Robinson.
Hi, Mayor. I just have one thing. The Midvale Community Council is working on some concepts for harvest days. They're looking for any feedback and participation from the council. They're considering doing a couple different options. One would be a trivia night, an Instagram photo contest, maybe a TikTok dance challenge, or even a Twitter photo challenge, or maybe virtual bingo. I think Laura's still working on a scavenger hunt, so I'll probably have them get in contact with Laura. But if anybody has any ideas or suggestions or would like to help, please reach out to either Amanda Hollingsworth or myself. And that will be it.
Thank you. Sounds like an exciting harvest days coming up. And we have the Hall of Honors that weekend too, am I right?
I think so.
Yes, that's the 31st of July.
Okay, very good. All right, Councilmember Paul Glover.
Nothing this evening.
Thank you. Councilmember Ryan Brown.
I don't have anything this evening.
Thank you. And Councilmember Dustin Gettle.
Two things very quick regarding fireworks. I had some complaints from people living at the Lofts and Talavera at the end of Tuscany View Road. You can go down and take a look, but where the road ends and the Jordan River Trail begins, there's just probably 20 different places where you can see that fireworks were set off in that back little area. So I'm not sure if we can post something specifically there for our next little event where fireworks will be set off there again. Just letting everyone know that that's a pretty sensitive area as far as setting off fireworks go. So I don't know if that's something Chief Larson or Thomas might be able to help out with in posting some signs back there. It's also just generally a bad idea because of the density back there as well.
Other cities have those roadside signs that delimit where fireworks are no longer legal. Maybe we could have some signs like that.
That would be a good idea. Like I said, the road just ends right there. So it's kind of just a place people either park when they're walking on the trail. So you could put a sign there that's not taking up any useful space. I think that would be a good idea for the next event coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say this subject comes up quite a bit, and we have not gone to the board and requested money in our budget to print signs and be able to put them up. It was decided quite a while ago that the cities could do that. I know Mill Creek and Cottonwood Heights do that through Public Works. They post them in areas where fireworks are restricted. If I'm thinking of the right place that you're talking about, Councilman Gettle, that place is off limits to fireworks.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's, I mean, first of all, it's in between two large apartment complexes, but it's also, you know, they're shooting towards the river.
Yeah.
So
a lot of the communities around the valley have posted signs in those areas for that very reason, and it does help. It is a good deterrent.
Okay. All right. So maybe I'll take some pictures tomorrow, send them around, and see if maybe Glenn or Kane has an idea of what we can do there.
We'll work on that with Public Works. If you'll give us an area, we'll get some signs made up, get them posted.
Okay, sounds good. And the second thing I wanted to mention real quick, I think I can never really tell if we're all getting the same emails or not, but we received probably a half dozen or more emails from people requesting that we, the council and the mayor, do not require face masks to be worn in public. I don't know, did you guys get those emails too over the past week?
They seem to just be auto-generated from some site.
Yeah, exactly.
I get them, and since they're auto-generated, I reject them in my mind. I don't think that's an appropriate way to reach out to us.
Well, yeah, I have troubles with it because, you know, people are reaching out in a way that does come to us. So, you know, whether or not we think it's a great idea, they have done something to express an idea or thought to us. So I do respond to them. But also, I just wanted to say for anyone who might be listening that, you know, we don't have the authority to do that one way or another. So my response to the folks who have emailed are just that they have to take that issue up with the governor, the county mayor, and if they want to, the president of the United States, all of whom seem to agree that wearing masks in public is a smart idea right now. So if there are any folks listening who sent those emails over the past week and didn't get my response, I just wanted to have that on the record. And that is it for me.
Okay, thank you very much. I've been kind of keeping track of the COVID cases in Midvale City as produced by the Salt Lake County Health Department. And since we went into yellow, we've had more cases than ever before. I don't know whether it was daring to people or what, but we're averaging nearly 6 new cases every day in our city. Now, fortunately, and I mean this sincerely, fortunately, the number of current cases has come down off the high. And we had a point at one time where we had 122 people that were being treated. And the last statistic that I have, that has been reduced to 92. So we're about 75% of the high right now. On the sad side, we have 16 people in the hospital. And that's the high that we've ever had. So we just have to knuckle down and take this serious. It's not to be played with. Masks, as Councilmember Gettle mentioned, they are lifesavers. They might be inconvenient. They might be hot to wear in July, but it's the best thing we have going to keep us germ-free, virus-free, and protecting those around us from coughs, sneezes, sniffles, whatever we might have. Let's take care of ourselves, everybody, and take care of those around us. And let's see these numbers come back down. The best news of all, not one person has died that has lived in Midvale due to coronavirus. So our hospital treatment is very effective, but we need to be more preventative as citizens in not even going to where coronavirus can get us. Tight quarters with no distancing and without masks is playing Russian roulette. It will get you sooner than later. Since this is our first regular council meeting, since our last one, we've had the passing of Mayor Seguini, and I think everybody should be aware of that. And I really want to express appreciation to everybody who participated in the memorial services, in the funeral. There's a lot of sentiment that Joanne Bagley Seguini brought out in our citizens, in civic groups around the city, county, state, and various organizations. Other cities sent their remorseful statements. They were sad to see her passing, and she was well respected, thought of, and what a legacy she has left. I want to especially express appreciation to Kane for his remarks in her memorial service. Very well done. Chief Thomas mentioned that we were over at Life Start. I didn't know we had cartoonists and artists in the UPD, but that rumor is true. There are cartoonists and artists in UPD, and they did a very good job with some Disney characters at the nurseries. And then I went over to the family shelter and saw the great carpenter work that our UPD officers, a whole different group of them, put that shed together, and it looked really well done. And I tried to push it, nothing bent, it's stable. So good job, UPD. And he also mentioned I went up to the gun range and got in a virtual training site where it's kind of a, I'd guess about 20, 24 feet across, 300 degrees surround, and I had a laser mounted pistol, and I guarantee you Chief Thomas does not want Mayor Hale backing him up. I didn't hit anything until about the fourth shot. And by then, the rest of us had been plugged pretty good. So, but it was a good exercise. It opened my eyes to the excitement, the adrenaline, the snap decision, the value of training that our police force goes through. And I really appreciate the opportunity to train there. I have to admit that's the first time I've ever fired a pistol in my life. So I've fired long guns, but never a pistol. That was a different experience. I also want to express my remorse for the passing of Carmen Contreras' husband. And I want to also mention that our museum director, Bill Miller's wife, passed away the same day. And so recently we've had some very close people to the city have lost loved ones. And it's a sad thing. It's a normal thing for life. And I just hope that whenever we see these good folks, Carmen or Bill or Mayor Seguini's descendants, that we offer a hand of friendship and love and support and do whatever we can to make at least the first year go by much smoother than sometimes it does. Okay, now if I can get back to the city manager report. Kane?
Thanks, Mayor. Appreciate your comments. Had a lot of the same comments on Mayor Sweeney's passing, a lot of emails and messages from cities and people who knew her in government and respected her. And that was a real hard couple of days for us, I think, last week. I know that the league has put together a video of a lot of things that she did for the League of Cities and Towns, and just want to express my condolences to their family. We're planning on putting together a proclamation and inviting the family to come in, where the city council and mayor can present a proclamation to the family. So we'll get that put together in the next month or so. Give them some time to go through that process. You all should have received notice on the winter jacket order that we're doing through the Employees Association. This is from our refund back from our safety program through the trust. We're using those funds this year to purchase a winter jacket for all of the employees and the city council that will have a Midvale logo on it. So we urge you to get your sizes and choice of jackets in quickly as possible. There's a lead time on those jackets. We need to get those ordered as quickly as we can. Does anybody have any questions on that program? If not, let's see, another business item. We've been invited again to participate in the Canyon Education Foundation Golf Tournament. It's in September 23rd. It's up at Wasatch Mountain State Park. We entered a team last year. Of course, we've those slots are reserved for the city council first and mayor, if they want to go, and then we'll fill them with whoever later. So any of you that would like to play in that, please let us know. We can get that entry form into the Canyons Education Foundation. And let's see, just let you know a little bit on the COVID-19. We're tightening up things here in City Hall. We're requiring masks to be worn on a daily basis when with any personal contact with the public. We're also going to require that the public wear masks. We'll put signs on the doors and ask them to put masks on before they come in. I know even if you go to a 7-Eleven or a Maverick, you have to put a mask on anymore, and they've got signs on their doors. So we would expect that everyone would pretty much have a mask available to them. So we'll be putting those signs out, tightening up our use of masks. And Laura put out an email today to the employees guiding the use of the protective mask. And also we are purchasing more masks and increasing our intervals on cleaning those masks. One other thing that I had was Beck sent out an email today. I was quite interested to see what the weekend had been for them, but they had their call volume had increased 175% over 2019 calls, which was an amazing number. So they received 1,109 calls between 9:30 and 12:30 on July 4th. Amazing amount of calls for the call takers at Beck. Did a fantastic job, handled it very well. My hat's off to the Beck organization and call takers and dispatchers. for what they did. I think it goes along with what Chief Thomas and Chief Larson have talked about, not having those city functions, fireworks displays and things like that. Everybody went out and got their own, and it caused a lot of problems, or at least a lot of calls. So very busy weekend this weekend for Beck. With that, I'll turn some time over to Matt Dahl, who's got a couple items to cover, I believe.
Thank you. I just one item for you, council members. I know that you've recently been contacted with regards to how we've been looking at using our CARES funds. These are funds from the federal government that are given to us through the county, and there's very specific uses that we can use the money for. See what happens when I don't talk for a long period of time and then I get going. I need to warm up. Anyway, there are very specific uses that we have for the CARES funds, and those generally have to be in some way related to things that we had not previously budgeted for and that are related to the COVID pandemic. And we've talked to you about being able to provide some technology in order to allow you to do more work from home. One of the other things that we're looking at that sort of coincides with some discussions that we've had in the past is how do we improve both the Dahl conference room and the city council chambers in order to make them better for the tele meetings that we've been having and setting them up for Zoom conference. So we have, IT has put together a package that we're looking to fund with the CARES dollars. That includes lapel mics, better screens, multiple cameras that can have different angles so that the members of the community that are watching meetings will be able to see the presentations better, as well as make sure that they understand which council members are talking. We're also going to improve the audiovisual equipment within the Dahl conference room in case there's a need for us to need to have sort of overflow space or in order to space out our meetings in a way that would make it safer for us during the time of this time during this pandemic. And so I just want to let you know that we're kind of moving in that direction, that is meeting some of the needs that have been voiced in the past by the council, and just wanted to make sure you didn't have any questions, comments, or concerns about that change. Great, that's all I had for you.
Mayor, that concludes city manager's report.
Thank you very much, Dean. Thanks, Matt. We now move into our department reports and get the Public Works report from Director Gordon Kennedy.
All right, good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Sweet.
Loud and clear.
Okay. All right. So just kind of some quick updates on some of the projects we've been working on the last couple of weeks. And then a recap kind of what water did with some of the funding you provided them last fiscal year. So in our yard, we have a vector sweeper decant system. So when we go out in the back, we need to separate the water from the solids before we can dispose of it. The system that we've had in the yard requires a lot of maintenance. In the investigation, we found that one of the large lines I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback from somebody typing.
Could we have everybody go on mute while he's talking?
Sweet, thank you. Sorry. We found a line that was installed with a belly in it, and Roland's crew, the Storm and Streets crew, went in and replaced it. But the benefit here is we were having to spend at least one day a week maintaining that system and cleaning it so that it would function. Since we've done this, 3 weeks ago, we have not had to perform any maintenance on it yet. So we're probably looking from going once a week to once a month. So that was really good by their their crew. That's what the patch looks like after. So some time saving on maintenance in the yard, which can be spent on maintenance in the city. Additional pump install for the Jordan Bluffs. So this kind of segues into impact fees, where we don't utilize impact fees. This is an example of maybe where they could be used. So as Jordan Bluffs comes online, they're going to increase the sewer load, and we needed to install a third pump in the south lift station. It was a tricky project, but our guys did it internally. You can see right there, they're lowering the last spool piece in. It was wired up and test ran today, and it's all good. So last fiscal year, you provided quite a bit of funding for the water system. We've replaced 10 hydrants in the last fiscal year. The addresses are there. And along with those hydrants are the aux valves, which you can kind of see there. We've gone back, replaced the landscaping and any asphalt that was disturbed during that. We are in the process of going out to bid right now to get 10 more for this next fiscal year. Same with the valve program. We replaced, I want to say 11 valves this last year. Lots of work. Streets are probably a little frustrated because they get to come in after and replace asphalt and sidewalk, but the water system is being maintained. As part of our sample program with the state, we are switching up from taking, I need to move the, oh crap. I gotta go back, hang on. There we go. I need to adjust something so I can see here. Okay. So the sample station is the green box that's locked. This is an example of the water department being smart and efficient. We placed a sample station next to a hydrant that was replaced. That way only one asphalt repair was needed. You can see the asphalt patch and the valve out in the road. We will be installing 20 more sample stations, as we're required to have 40 samples locations within the city for the state. We were taking them out of fire hydrants, which is not optimal. You don't generally get a clean sample. So this is much better program. Quick update on community center. That's the pavilion. I don't know if any of you have been down there to see it, but it's quite impressive. We are still looking at early August completion date, and hopefully we'll have some pictures of the inside next report. To wrap up really quickly, parks. We've had a lot of irrigation issues in the main park this last 3 or 4 weeks. A few mainline breaks and then a programming issue on one of the clocks. Some of the grass over there doesn't look great, but we think we figured out the programming issue this afternoon. If you get some calls on increased watering over the next couple weeks, we're trying to bring the grass back, but it will be normal watering after that. And lastly, I would just like to thank Candy and Alan Tippett. We've had a few meetings with them. They have been very helpful and supportive with helping out in a few responsibilities in the park, keeping the tape up on the playground, pulling garbage cans out so that Ace can get them, filling doggy pot bags, a whole host of things. They've been very, very, very helpful. They're wanting to get a program, kind of an adopt a park program started, and hopefully we'll find some time to work that out with them. But I just wanted to give them some credit. They've been very, very helpful. So that's all I have. Is there any questions? Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Appreciate what you do over there, Glenn, and your crews. They've done exceptional work during this period of COVID and demands upon their time. Thank you.
They have it. They've handled it very well. It's not an easy situation, but we're working through it. So thanks, Mayor.
Okay, now we'll move to a public hearing. I'd like a motion to open the public hearing, please.
Mayor, I move we open a public hearing.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to open the public hearing. Any comments or questions on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Any opposed? All right, we're now in a public hearing to consider a request to vacate city-owned rights of way located west of Bingham Junction Boulevard. I suspect that's right where Ivy Drive and Binary come together. Is that right, Alex?
Yep.
Okay. Would you explain that for us, please?
Will do, gladly. Let me share my screen for you real quick. All right, are you seeing my plat here? Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. So earlier this year, we had the Jordan Bluffs Lot 201A amended subdivision go through the process, and that was originally done so that there could be a parcel created for the Zions project there at the north end of Jordan Bluffs. The zoning ordinance requires that subdivisions be done after the large-scale master plan for any particular project in this zone, or they be done to dedicate public right-of-way and or public park space to create lots. So when we went through this process, there hadn't been a large-scale master plan done yet, and in order to get that lot created for Zions to purchase, Gardner dedicated a couple rights-of-way, Binary and Ivy Drive, and then also some of the future linear park space for Jordan Bluffs. After we went through this process, Zions came back with a different design, and now we have some items to discuss later, talking about text amendments and development agreement updates and such. But now this layout for these public streets is in the way and interferes with the Zions layout. So Gardner has requested that the city vacate these rights of way so that they can reconfigure the future public streets to match where Zions would like to put their building. We've gone through the process that's laid out in the city ordinance so far. That requires a requester to submit kind of a detailed request for what they want to see vacated, the various city departments to review and provide comments, the planning commission to hold a public hearing, and now the council hold a public hearing. So far, nobody has really raised any concerns with this proposal. The roads haven't been built yet. We're going to get a plat that realigns some of these roads in the very near future. And there isn't really any sort of concern with fixing this to allow that Zions project to proceed as proposed. So at this point, we're just looking to have a public hearing and see if there are any comments. And then if the council is on board with this proposal, then we'd request that they give us some direction to prepare an ordinance to finalize the vacation alongside some of those later review decisions. Any questions?
Questions for Alex? Rory, are there any public comments on this?
No, Mayor, I have no comments.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing then.
Mayor, I move we close the public hearing.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to close this public hearing. Any questions or comments on the motion before we go ahead? All in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Public hearing is closed. I'll entertain a motion.
Mayor, I move that we approve the requested vacation of Ivy Drive west of Bingham Junction Boulevard and Binary Way, and direct staff to prepare an ordinance formalizing the decision for consideration in a later meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Rory, would you call the vote, please?
Yes, Councilmember Sperry,
Aye.
Glover,
Aye.
Robinson,
Aye.
Brown,
No. And just for reference, before people ask, I don't like the new park layout, and I think this goes with it. So that's why I'm voting no.
and Gettle.
Yes.
That motion passes. Thank you. We'll now move to the consent agenda consider the approval of the minutes of June 30, 2020, and to set a date and time being August 11th of 2020 at 7 o'clock for a public hearing on the proposed Midvale City fiscal 2021 budget, beginning July 1, which is already past 2020, and ending June 30, 2021. We have a motion on that consent agenda.
Mayor, I motion that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Any questions or comments upon the motion?
Can I just say, Rory, you did an amazing job on the minutes, and the end of last meeting with the UPD discussion, you did a great job of muddling through what actually occurred.
Thank
at
you.
the end. So good job on that.
Appreciate that. Shelley did a fabulous job in that. She does them for me, so she did a great job.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Rory, would you ask the question?
Yes, Councilmember Glover.
Aye.
Robinson,
Aye.
Brown,
Yes.
Gettle,
Yes.
and Sperry.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is an action item to consider approval of the final subdivision plat for a 6-lot Lennon Lane subdivision located at 455 East Greenwood Avenue. Jana, would you help us with that, please?
Yes, I'm here. Just give me 1 second to get the slide. Okay. Okay, so this is just an action item on Lund Lane subdivision at 455 East, 7500 South. I'm gonna share my screen. So there's no, do you guys see the screen? Can you guys see the screen? Okay.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm just gonna go this way. So the only conditions, the Planning Commission conducted a public hearing and then issued a recommendation on April 8th, and the City Council conducted a public hearing on the subdivision plat on May 13th, 2020. And approved the preliminary subdivision plat with 3 conditions. These 3 conditions were notes on the plat that were added to the final. And the only things that we need to address at this point are just between the city engineer. He asked for a couple of corrections regarding grading and drainage, which came from public comment. But the easements on these drainage points, on these retention ponds were added to the plat, and these are all the notes that were required. And staff recommend approval of the final plat with those revisions from the city engineer, fire marshal, and city staff. And once it's approved by staff, the applicant shall obtain all required signatures on the final Mylar. And it's also a requirement that existing home and accessory structures must be removed prior to recording the final plat, because they'll go over property line or building. Property lines will go over existing buildings. Any questions?
The only question I had is looking back into my notes, we didn't have a meeting on the 13th of May. We had meetings on the 5th and the 19th.
Oh. Well, then that would be a typo in the staff report.
Jana, the 13th of May was a planning commission meeting.
So that's what, yeah, that was my confusion, because it says there was the planning commission decision, and then there was the city council public hearing, which of course we didn't have on the 13th.
Okay, I have to just look at that staff report then, and then we'll have to revise that.
And Jana, my recollection of this is that there was some discussion about
things that the developer had to do to work with the neighboring owners.
Right.
Those were not part of our conditions of approval, but are we still reminding the developer of those things?
Yeah, so that was between the city engineer. I'm sorry, I can't find out how to turn my screen on. That was with the city engineer, and we had to discuss back and forth what the residents were really asking, because their concerns were based on height. And so the grade at the site, it goes down. If you visit it, it just starts to go down right at the beginning of the driveway. So they wanted, the neighbors wanted a grading plan basically for all surrounding sites to ensure that they weren't going to add fill, because they would be, you know, it's less invasive to have the 2-story structures if it starts with this existing grade, which isn't laid out in our ordinance, but often is, especially in hillside communities. So Keith, the city engineer, that's the corrections he asked for, was to show existing grade and proper drainage on the site with existing grade.
Okay.
And then the meeting was on May 5th, 2020. City Council approved the preliminary subdivision plat.
Any further questions on this recommendation? Well, hearing none. Entertain a motion.
Sorry, Mayor, I'm still reviewing the notes from the previous meeting. I just wanted to be sure that we weren't missing anything.
You're fine.
Once I find that, I will make the motion. Mayor, based on compliance with the requirements of the Midvale City Municipal Code, I move that we approve the final subdivision plat for the Lennon Lane subdivision with the following conditions. 1, the applicant shall obtain all required signatures on the final subdivision plat Mylar. 2, the existing home and accessory structure must be removed prior to recording the final plat.
There's a motion. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion prior to the vote?
Did I miss it, or did we have public comment? Did we close the public meeting?
It's an action item. There's no public.
Okay, we're good.
Any questions or comments? Barry, would you?
Yes. Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Brown,
Yes.
Gettle,
Yes.
Barry,
Aye.
and Glover.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to the discussion regarding Jordan Bluffs and Zion's Bancorp, I guess. Alex Murphy.
So Mayor, right before we move on, sorry, the thing that we talked about in the work, the work session, and the moratorium, the project that we just approved, that's one of those that would be subject to that moratorium, correct? And maybe we need Nate to.
I thought we said anything that was an application wouldn't.
Well, you can't, you're right. I mean, anybody who's made the application, you can't put the moratorium on by law. I'm saying this is the type that it would go on to prevent those going forward until we look further at.
I can chime in on that one. This application was not for a master plan development. So if we approach it from the master plan developments we're going to put a moratorium on master plan developments, this would not be affected by it. This was a subdivision with duplexes or twin homes rather.
Okay. But if we can't do it just on the master plan development, if it's just moratorium on the single family development, be subject to it, right?
If we did one that broadly, and this application hadn't already been submitted prior to that moratorium going into effect, then yes, it could be. But it sounded like from our discussion earlier that the general consensus seemed to be multifamily style master plan development projects would be the ones affected by the moratorium if we could do that.
Yeah, and Lisa's going to look into that. Okay.
Also, the moratorium doesn't take place till we actually vote on it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, thanks, Mayor.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question, keeping us on course. All right, Alex, now what about Jordan Bluffs and Zion?
Jana, could you stop sharing your screen, please?
Mhm.
Okay. I don't have anything to share on this one. I just wanted to make sure you could all see me. So for this discussion, I'm actually going to have Gardner and WRNS, who are the architects for Zion's, set the stage first, and then I'll dive into the staff report that we sent out with the packet. So Brian and Brian, you guys here and ready to go?
Yep. We are here. Hey, I'll just really quick, just for the council benefit, and I hope you can hear me. I'm getting a tiny bit of feedback, but I just wanted to introduce you guys. I can't remember if we've introduced you in the past to WRNS, but they are actual world-renowned architects. We have Brian Millman and Brian Childs. We worked with them multiple times in the past.
Would everyone please go on mute that's not talking? We're having a lot of problems. I can't even hear him. Thanks. Okay, Mark, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Mayor. We've worked with them multiple times in the past and projects in Utah. They're out of San Francisco. They both have worked at WRNS for many years, so two of the principals of WRNS. Brian Shiles currently, well, I guess pre-COVID, teaches at Ohio State, I believe UCLA, and has a master's degree from Harvard, and also teaches at Stanford. So we have kind of the architect on the scene, and it's quite fun. We're going to have these guys run us through kind of the thought process of, why we tweak the site plan, as some of you have probably seen, but I'll turn it over to Brian and he can kind of walk us through that, but we're here if you have any larger scope questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. Hey guys, it's great to be here or virtually here. And this is a really amazing, exciting project. We're honored to be part of it. We're honored to be part of the Utah community and part of the Midvale community. So we always love working there. We have been working in Utah for quite a while and enjoy it. And we feel blessed that we have been welcomed there. So that's thing one. We're glad to be here. I wish we were really here, but you know what I mean. We're glad to be engaged. So I'm going to not take too long. You know how architects can drone on and on and on, especially architects that teach. So I'm going to give you the kind of, by the way, it's Berkeley that I teach at and not UCLA. I sort of rolled over inside a little
Sorry
bit,
about that.
as Mark was saying, but it's okay. It's actually okay. Little rivalry there. So we're going to give you the broad brushes, Brian Millman and I, and kind of hopefully give you a flavor as to why the changes were made. They were not capricious. It was not just about, hey, let's us make our mark, or or Gardner wanting to do something, the Gardner Company. I just wanted to do something for no particular reason. There was a set of reasons behind this, and we just want to lay them out for you guys, and have a discussion or just see what happens. All right, so let's go to the next one. So we're gonna, first of all, just the site. You guys, of course, know your site. You know, I don't have to tell you about your community, but we put up a drawing like this to really talk about a little bit about our thought process in that the things that we do, you know, when we're working for a group like the Gardeners, of course, they're, you know, it's a, you know, this is a real estate venture, but it's also, it's primarily a community venture. So we like to look at a community, understand as much as we can about what's going on around a site, not just physically, but also culturally. And so we look at a, you know, a drawing like this and do some analysis about what is close to the site. How can we connect to the site? And I'll just sort of connect, or I'll sort of point out a couple of major things here. One is that the northwest corner of the site is connected to Gardner Station, Ease and Gardner Village, easy walking distance. And so that's something, that close proximity is something we want to leverage. The Jordan River is becoming a very beautiful thing. The trail along the Jordan River is a beautiful natural aspect of the site. And then of course, the Jordan River Big Bend restoration to the south of the site, there's a beautiful prospect when you stand on the south of the site and overlook that Jordan River Big Bend restoration. It's a very beautiful thing. Then of course, Bingham Junction Road, Ivy on the east-west direction, and the original sort of beginning of Binary Way are all strong connections that we want to tie into. We look to make connectivity and continuity across the boundaries of the site, right? Because this development doesn't stop at the edge of this development. We want to tie into the community at large. So we're always looking for ways to do that. So next. So the next slide you're going to see is where the site plan was, and I'm just going to try to speak agnostically, factually about what the aspects of this are that this whole team wanted to change. So especially to the north of the site, north of Ivy, I would characterize the site as being disconnected buildings surrounded by seas of parking. And that's sort of what the overall site is about. The park, the central park, although a good idea for a park, we thought there was an opportunity to connect that park to the natural landscape in a way that might be a little bit stronger. And we also thought there was an opportunity here to create a different kind of development than what is depicted here. And that is one of connectivity, walkable streets, a community within this site, and a lot more, let's say, sense of community in how the architecture, streets, public spaces, and connections are arranged. So let's go to the next one. So here's just a diagram of the new proposal. And there are two major sort of components or built components to the proposal. To the north, north of Ivy is a mixed use core. And what you see in blue is thought of as being commercial. What you see in gray is thought as being structured parking lined with housing. So not parking structures facing streets, but housing facing streets and parking structures embedded within them. To the south of Ivy, everything you see there in yellow is residential, and we would see a real mix of product there from multifamily podium products to townhouses and everything in between, and some tuck under. So those are the built components, but the big, I think the big moves here really have to do with everything you see in green. So you see on the west side of the site, lining the Jordan River, is Bluffside Park. And one of the things that the Gardner Company wanted to do is make sure that everyone in the project was within a very, very short walk to a natural amenity. And so that park now is a long linear park that everyone has access to, but it really leverages the Jordan River and the restoration to the south into the character of that park. And we think just amplifies that park and the experience of being there. A different kind of park called a recreation park there, which really is sort of in the Ivy Street alignment. We see as being an active park. Over to the right of that park, you see the size of a soccer field right there. So this is a park that we'd see as being very active, very highly programmed, very recreational, obviously, in its character. So there really is an armature of green open space, of public space with Bluffside Park and the recreation park really forming the backbone for the project. From a street standpoint, you see the big black arrow. We still haven't named that street. We can't call it Main Street because y'all already have a Main Street. You can't have two Main Streets. But there is a primary north-south connector that goes from Binary Way down to Ivy. And we see that street as being quite a village street. As much retail as is possible. That's always an economic and financial question. But the scale of that street, which is lined by either commercial, retail, or housing, we would see as being tree lined in a village street that is very vibrant. But look at that, there's about 200 feet from that street to the park to the west, right? So the opportunity here to create a kind of village environment with a connection to nature, which is so spectacular in Utah, is what this is all about. The residential portion to the south is seen as being village-like as well. The structure of those streets is a little less formal than in the mixed-use core, but we would see a lot of opportunities there for entries facing the street, stoops facing the streets, buildings and houses with faces that make a real public realm in the residential core there. Let's go to the next. So this is a little bit about the metrics. You can see that big orange dotted circle. That's a 5-minute walk from the middle of the commercial core to any part of the commercial core, and that really speaks to how the tightness of this project and what we hope would be the kind of vibrant community or the vibrant village kind of aspect to it. To the north of Binary there is the Zion site. We'll get into that just a little bit more detail. You can see the connection to rail right there. We're working on a heavily landscaped and we hope very pleasant connection from rail into the heart of the mixed use core. The north-south axis going down to the east-west park. And you can kind of see the intent here, I hope, of making something that is about streets, squares, parks, and a public realm. Next. A little bit more coming next into the, whoa, it's distended on my screen. I hope you guys can see this okay. Let's go, yeah, it's okay. Just a little bit about the Zion site, which is north of Binary. There's about a 400,000 square foot building in an L-shaped configuration, which we see as being really the cap, this kind of cornerstone to the north-south street. And in fact, the building has a lobby, which is a bit like a porch or a dog trot that goes right through the building. So there's a southern entry, which really we think is going to enhance the public plaza to the south. There's a northern entry, which connects to all the parking, 1,600 cars, 800 in the parking structure that you see up near closer to the north side, and then 800 stalls on the surface. And the building is really meant to connect to the Bluff Park to the west and be a strong anchor for the north-south street to the south.
Hey, Brian, before you move to the next, do you mind just mentioning also where the next phase would go, just so people know?
Yeah, Brian, can you, right where the cursor is, right? So you would end up with a building that's much more frontal to Bingham Junction and enclose a kind of courtyard with the first phase. And also that building would form a real gateway at Binary Way. So at the corner of Binary and Bingham Junction, you'd have a very strong marker and kind of entry into the district. There we go. We'll do them in pink too. Next. So just a couple of things that we're looking at here. There's a whole suite, of public amenities, from dog park to gardens and overlooks. We're looking at a fair amount of solar panels here. Brian is going to get a little bit, the other Brian, going to get a little bit more into the sustainability aspirations of the project. But this is really meant to show how important the landscape is to this project. The buildings are, of course, but connections to the landscape through trails, connections to the train station, pickleball courts, etc., are an important part of this project. Next. We're going to see just a couple of just massing sketches, really, of the Zion's project. We're in the southwest corner. of the project right now. So you're seeing a 6-story volume, which is the cap to the major north-south street. You're seeing in the corner an all-hand space, which is a double height space that will hold 700 or 800 folks, that spills out to an exterior court and takes great advantage of the beautiful sort of prospect to the park. And then you can see the west elevation of the building really connecting to the Bluff Park. Next. We're going to see a perspective just looking, and this is massing, perspective looking up the north-south street, seeing that 6-story volume. There's a porch-like entry to the left of that image. Now we're at the train station more or less, and you can see the connection across the Jordan River, the footpath that will go up the bluff and connect to the heart of the project. And also the kind of position of the Zions project on the bluff, a very prominent position. We think of a good perspective to 1700 South, and a real cap for the overall district planning. Brian.
Okay, so we know that sustainability is super important to the community of Midvale, but it's also very, very important to Zions and at WRNS. We often push sustainability in many ways, and this has been just an incredible project because of the reach that this project is taking, which is unlike a lot of projects that we work on. So you can see number one is there's a goal for the Zions project to hit LEED Platinum, which is quite an undertaking. It's a lot harder now than it used to be 5-10 years ago. So that's a huge thing. There's a push to be close to net zero energy and offset a lot of the energy used by the project with on-site renewables. Zions made a really important decision, which was huge for long-term global warming and the use of fossil fuels by pushing for an all-electric mechanical and heating and cooling system, if you will. Oftentimes those systems are powered by gas, and by going to all-electric, Zions has essentially gone all in with the concept that renewables are the future, and that we need to be careful about how we use carbon. So one of the key things about this project is its desire to push, and Zion's desire to push health and wellness. So a few things, as Brian was alluding to in the renderings that we're looking at, natural daylighting and views, very important. Making sure that we use healthy materials throughout the project. Clearly, the kind of air that we're pushing around in the project is very important, and we've been looking at much more enhanced filters than what you typically see in a lot of office buildings. Recreation, one of the big things about wellness is making sure people are connected to the outdoors and are exercising. So, this site is just already set up to be able to accommodate that with its adjacency to the trail. But a huge amount of bike lockers and bike sharing and showers and locker rooms connected to the park for employees and staff will help promote the use of the trail and hopefully, frankly, get cars off the streets and hopefully, promote people commuting to work. And then there's a goal to have, a cafe in the building, and of course, super healthy options for eating and to promote healthy habits. One of the things that we've done recently is we've hired a habitat consultant because Zions thought that the connection to the Jordan River and the Parkway and the bluffs was really important to them and their staff. And so we've brought on biologists and ecologists, and we've been talking to the folks who've been working on the Big Bend restoration project. We've gone on field walks, and we are pushing to greatly promote, the plant materials that will promote wildlife, birds and insects and other species, to be able to help not only this site, but the whole region. And we think about those things as incubators for and promoters to help support the Big Bend and other aspects of the Jordan Parkway. And that is it.
Thank you, guys.
We're happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
Yeah, Mark, I personally don't love the 4-story garage as what everyone's going to see. How's the front of that going to look? I envision this being like this jewel that everyone, Center Street's one of the most driven down roads by people from West Jordan when they go to state. And I thought for sure we were going to have, this building everyone can see, and they're going to see a 4-story parking garage now. I hope that there's some architecture with that or something, because I personally think that's terrible.
Yeah, no, good question. And so we have actually talked with staff quite a bit about that. I'll probably let Brian Millman respond because he might speak to it a little bit more educated than I would, but the answer is it'll definitely be screened, and we have been working on that. But go for it, Millman.
Yeah, I know that Alex has been working with you, Mark, and others to put together requirements for the garage. And one of the key aspects of the garage design is that it tie into the architecture of the buildings adjacent to it. So there will be some materials that are on the office building that we would be placing on the garage to help screen it. There's also a lot of thinking about the garage doesn't have any underground aspects, but we're trying to burrow it in a little bit into the grades, which actually works out respective to some of the soils there. And it will greatly limit the appearance and height of the garage as it's viewed from Center Street.
But it will be clear it's a parking garage. So that's what everyone will see when they think of the Zions building, unless they're driving down, Bingham Junction.
I think the goal is to place materials on the parking garage that you don't typically see on parking garages. That which is typically you just see cars, right? And you see rails and cars. And the goal here is that we are actually putting some materials in here to emulate.
Yeah, so just as an example, Councilman, what we've talked about is where you normally see concrete, you would see like a metal panel or what the building's actually made out of. So it'll be a similar material. So it will still be a parking garage, of course, but the idea is to try to create a little more fenestration so it looks a little bit cleaner. Another thing, just to kind of just reiterate the design, and I totally can appreciate that you're not loving it, but the idea is that there's kind of this main street, a main boulevard, and so Zions is actually that end cap to it. So that's why you see the buildings placed as such. And so that's why it made sense to have this along here. Another thing we've done on a lot of studies is just looked at the height of the structure versus the hill. And I probably won't pull up the right image right now, so I'll send it over to everybody later, but we have a great image showing what that'll look like. Because what actually happens is you get a lot of landscaping that's not there along Center Street, and it's actually going to kind of slow that view down a little bit. And so I think you're going to see less of a parking structure and more of kind of an overall project. It's kind of what we're hoping for. So Shiles, anything to add in there? What did we miss?
No, I think it gets it. There's a tension on the site between making a walkable community on the site connected to rail and what you see from the cars. But I think you described well in what we're pretty sure the effect will be. I think that parking structure is going to not only be clad, but join more with the landscape. And that northwest corner of the Zions project is pretty prominent. But Mark had it right. When we were first out on the site with Mark and his partners, we all started talking about buildings that were close together so that you made a kind of vibrant community on the site, and then connect that vibrant walkable community, to sort of connection points to the community at large. And that got us putting, things closer together, and along this street. And if we don't have the kind of energy of adjacency to the buildings, then we won't have that vibrant, walkable place, right? And that became a very important thing to do, while also trying to balance with what you're going to see from the surrounding driving streets. And so that was the tug of war, no doubt about it. That was the calculus that we all went through.
I just wanted to say that I like these plans. I think obviously, you know, we can sit here and say that's not what we were told. And the reality is you guys are the experts. You don't want to be left with a project that doesn't look good to you. So I think you're doing as much with the community in mind, both present community and future community. And, you know, I think we would be well versed to trust your judgment. You know, the list of accolades of the group precedes you. So that's how I'm coming into this project. Like, yeah, we could say, but you told us this and you told us that, but this is what you're telling us now. And I, for one, happen to trust your judgment.
I'll echo what Councilmember Gettle just said.
I have a problem with the park. The problem I see is this park, the way it's laid out, is mostly going to benefit the people that actually live and work there and not the rest of Midvale. And that was the biggest concern I had at the time, is that we had a park that everybody felt in Midvale could come down and use. We don't have a lot of parks in Midvale. And that park that we were set and told that we would get now is being reduced considerably for the other residents of Midvale. I really don't see as much area used for the park, mostly on hillsides. It just, to me, it looks like we're going back to the way we were in some of our other developments, that green space is not really going to be able to be used by Midvale citizens.
Paul, I think that's a valid point. It's just a different changing opportunity to get people to utilize the park that is going to be there, which is going to connect to the Jordan River Trail, which, you know, is a natural unused beauty as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, it's there now for Midvale residents to use. And unfortunately, it's taken COVID-19 to get more people down using the Jordan River Trail, but I think it'll just be a natural, hopefully anyway, a natural transition once that park is in and once people get curious and head down that way.
I just think we're losing too much square footage to the slope and not to a park that our citizens can come and use.
This might be a good time for me to hop in and run through the information that we've been working on with Mark and WRNS to respond to this concept, because it does incorporate some of those concerns that are coming up about the park space. So I'll start at the top with how we've been approaching this at the staff level. So clearly, this is a pretty dramatic departure from what we had in the zoning ordinance and the Jordan Bluffs Master Development Agreement previously. So as part of this overall process, we've been working real closely with Gardner and with WRNS to put together some proposed changes to the zoning ordinance and to the Master Development Agreement, and then also to put together a development agreement for Zions that will try and reflect the change in concept and also preserve some of these city amenities and city concerns that we've been hearing and discussing throughout this entire process. So there's three parts to that. First is the text amendment. In order to see this concept realized, we do have to make some changes to the zoning ordinance. That includes changes to kind of the overall pod layout, which Brian showed towards the beginning, where you could see the old linear park down the center with the pods on the sides, to an updated pod layout that reflects kind of this new street design and this new proposed park plan. We also need to put together some new road standards, revise some of the landscape and building requirements, including setbacks. We need to put together a new concept for street hierarchy to reflect this sort of dominant main street. We've kind of taken to calling it off main in some of our internal conversations, but prioritizing that street and then creating a network that serves it as part of this ordinance and development agreement. We've looked at making some changes to some building heights and to some parking standards. So building heights are proposed to be increased. The parking standards for offices are proposed to be modified so that instead of having 2 office calculations, we have one that provides a range, which matches what Zion's in specific and Gardner in general kind of have in mind for the overall build out. We're proposing some changes to the access to reflect some concerns that the city engineer had, some fencing and loading, and then some of those parking garage design requirements. In the master development agreement, we do talk about the park. Some of the requirements for the park in the original MDA said that it had to be a certain area, had to be at least 15 acres, had to have a certain dollar amount of improvements installed, and it had to be a certain width. The area, well, actually all of those requirements are still in the MDA. So we still have the 15-acre requirement. We still have the dollar amount. We still have the minimum width. That area, that 15 acres, is not proposed or in our minds allowed to include the slope area. So all of the park space you're seeing and all the park space that we would get in that 15 acres would be on top of the slope, not on the side of it. We wouldn't see any sort of reduction in that usable space so much as a reconfiguration of where it goes. We also still have the requirements for public parking and public access. So as we get to some of these projects that are adjacent to the park and Gardner or whomever is required to build out that park and park access, we'll be making sure to include parking and access arrangements and such for that. One of the benefits of moving it over here to the slope is, as Brian mentioned, we do have a much better connection to the existing parkway trail. It's much easier to make those slope connections on the north, south, and central areas because it's literally just going up the hill. And then we go from the parkway trail to the park and we're there. We don't have to worry about moving through parking lots or moving through office spaces or other plazas, sorts of things that might be a little more private in nature. In that vein, we are proposing some minor changes to the park or the trail design, just to kind of provide some flexibility in lighting is really all it is. We also were looking to establish some maintenance expectations on the slope and the wetland areas, and then providing some timing of the build out, just so that we can guarantee that it all comes together as we're kind of envisioning here. So that's zoning ordinance and MDA in kind of a nutshell. I did want to mention one other thing. On the parking garages, we are putting in or proposing to put in some architectural standards, like Brian mentioned, where we would require some additional material improvements for parking garages that are visible and within relatively close proximity to some of these streets, with the intent being that we want to incentivize screening parking garages behind buildings or other features as much as possible, and then providing in what we have been calling an enhanced architectural finish for those structures when screening is not an option. So we have been working long and hard on that one. And for the Zions project in particular, not only do we have those standards in this proposed zoning ordinance, but we also have some of them tied to the RDA's financial contributions to the project. And Nate could probably speak more about that one. A couple of the things that we haven't quite worked out yet in the MDA are the park as you're seeing it here doesn't necessarily meet that width requirement across the whole thing. So we do need to spend a little bit more time detailing out how that's going to work. It probably isn't necessary at this stage because we do have that strict language in the MDA that says it has to be 125 feet wide, it has to be 15 acres. And so when those projects come in that are in the areas where those pinch points are, we can make sure to address them as part of the site review and development agreement. We also, what was the other one? In the report I mentioned, we were still working on wetland and slope language. We've mostly settled on that one. Last I heard, I think we had the final draft about ready, and it should be the one that Rory sent out to you earlier today. So you'll see some of that in there. There's still some flexibility in the timing put into the development agreement. So the south end can develop kind of somewhat independently of the north end. But overall, we're feeling pretty confident that we're seeing an improvement in this overall project area and this layout with these changes. And I'm happy to go into some greater detail if you want to kind of talk about what each requirement might mean. Today's discussion is really meant to just be that introduction, and then the plan is on the 21st to bring back the development agreement, or the text amendment, the master development agreement, the Zion's development agreement, the preliminary plat, and the vacation to finalize those decisions so Zion's can really get started on the groundwork about a month later in August. So with that, are there any other questions that we can answer at this time?
I just want to say, I think the connection to the Jordan Parkway existed, at least on the north end originally, and we're overstating, you know, what we wanted was, you know, like a splash pad or pickleball courts, a food court. The distance between the parkway and the park are pretty far. It's not like you're going to have more than 10% of the people going to this linear park going, oh, now let's walk down this hill and then go to the parkway. I don't necessarily think those are connected. How much public parking are we getting out of this? Because aren't we taking this over as a city at one point?
Yeah, we will.
Complete? And where would they be parking for it? You know,
so the requirement right now is that each pod adjacent to the park provide some number of public parking stalls that we basically have to sort out when we get to the development agreement. So we've got right now 2 pods there along the north-south axis. So you'd have either a shared parking space between the 2 or 2 separate parking areas between Ivy and Binary. The Zion's portion is not part of the public park. That's some private area that may allow public access, but isn't included in the 15-acre calculation or in the area that the city would be responsible for or provide access to. Down on the south where the residential components are proposed, we'd have to look at, you know, which pods are adjacent to park space and make sure that each pod is providing that public access. But it's not something that we have defined right now because it's really going to be heavily dependent on how those sites lay out when the designs start coming together. The one thing to really heavily emphasize in here is, even though we've got a concept in front of us that has a variety of buildings shown on it, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get buildings that exactly match what's shown on this plan. It'll be close.
Right, because this already looks way different than the original one.
Yeah.
So I get that. But you're saying the North Trail entrance will not be a public access then?
It will. The Zion's Park portion, Brian, if you could.
The darker green?
Yeah, the darker green. That's not
the trail
public.
will be still public?
Yep, trail will be public. In fact, that's a requirement in the original development agreement that we've maintained in this amendment. This plan is a little bit of an older one. There have been some changes to here, so that trail alignment, for instance, has been realigned so that it doesn't cross Zion's Corner. It goes directly to the park space just south of it that will be public. There's also been some minor changes to like where the RSL facility is proposed on Ivy and some of those street networks. Those are shown more in the packet that I sent you.
I would personally like updates as they come in instead of being, you know, within a week or whatever of a extremely drastic change. I don't really like that. So if you've had other iterations and stuff, as they come in, send them to us. We, you know, council, we are good at not sharing things if we don't need to, but you know, I would prefer to see these as soon as they come. So when I don't get these a few days beforehand and go, gee, this seems nothing like what we originally thought, and have to make decisions. So if you could provide, and I probably would hate it less if I was able to talk this through maybe with you or Mark or something beforehand, but this sort of like here, and let's talk about it right now. I don't like these changes.
Well, that's part of why we wanted to have this as a discussion rather than putting you on the spot. So if there's feedback that we should try and incorporate in these text changes or development agreement updates, I know we'd be happy to hear it. Would see what we can do to accommodate it.
Well, I'm back to, we're ending up with a linear park, really narrow linear park, pretty much like we have over on the other properties we've developed, and they haven't really worked out for the citizens of Midvale. And I guess that's my biggest concern is that I need to see something that it looks like all our citizens can come down and use as a park, not spread out really long and thin.
Hey, this is Ben Seastrom with the Gardner Company. Is it okay if I address some of these comments a little bit?
Sure, go ahead.
Excellent, thank you. I think Alex and Brian, everyone's done a tremendous job of kind of walking you through a lot of information that I know you have not had a lot of time to digest. But I would just reiterate, and Paul and Councilman Glover, Councilman Brown, we could set up a meeting, kind of talk a little bit in more detail on your concerns. But in terms of the park, Alex mentioned the acreage of the park has actually gone up from what it was in the iteration you saw before. And we're still committed to every amenity that we'd shown that we had a list of that was in the zone. We're still committed to having those within this park. Obviously, you can see it kind of varies. There are some pinch points, but overall, the width of this park does not vary very much from what you saw beforehand. And something Brian Childs talked about is we really like the way this park, rather than being, in the middle of this private development and private buildings, by pushing it out to the west and having that, it still has access to the Jordan River, but it's visible access now. It really makes it feel larger and bigger. The slope is not included in our acreage counts of the area of the park. And we just think the way this runs lends itself so much better to public access and inviting the public to come and participate and use this in that realm. So that's kind of where we're coming from. And like I said, we'd love to sit down and meet with you and kind of talk in more detail on some of the reason behind a lot of these changes.
Hey, and if I can add one more thing, I'm sorry, my internet's been a little spotty, so I apologize. But the acreage of the park that we're talking about right now, that acreage doesn't include what Zions is doing here. So we're actually picking up extra acreage with Zions. So we're 15 plus acres on everything that's actually just to the south here. So I just wanted to clarify that we actually are picking up extra kind of park area. But yeah, as Ben's saying, we're more than happy to chat with anybody and kind of walk through some of the changes. And I'm sorry you're getting them last minute. That was never our intention. But just wondering if there's any other questions by chance. We'd love to field anything else, or if there's anything else, Councilman Brown or Councilman Glover, that's on the top of your mind as we take 2 weeks and then come back to you again.
So I have another question.
Yeah,
your sort of original renderings, the slope had a lot of solar on it, which I thought was cool.
Yeah.
Are you guys still planning that?
Yeah.
Okay,
So the current plan with Zions, and we are not finalized on this plan, but is to have solar panels here and then potentially there as well. But the idea is to have the park be fed as much possible by the solar panels on the hill.
But the rest of that slope, will that eventually have solar panels for residential?
Yep, that's the idea, is that right now we do Zion and
You kind of broke up there, Mark.
I'm sure it was really cool though. Whatever you just said was probably really great.
All right, when you get your internet back, Mark, restate that.
This is Kane. I think what might be helpful is for Gardner to come back with a proposal on how to utilize the green space. So it is a usable park area, similar to what they did with the original park plan, and show how some of the amenities can go in there. I had a hard time when I first saw this design. I was struggling the same as the council was, and still am in some respects, but I've been assured that all of those amenities, the pickleball courts, the athletic fields, and those items that we were shown in the beginning would fit in these areas. So I think that's what would be helpful for our council to see now is how this park could be programmed.
Agree. Sometimes just looking at this image, the scale can be a little misleading. Because it's just the site is so large that sometimes the width of some of these spaces it's you can fit fields of sports activities along this. So I agree with you, Kane, that if we zoom in there and start to show the actual layouts that we're proposing, then it starts to give you a different kind of scale.
Hey, Brian, we might re-reference the soccer field, which is at the east end of the recreation court. So just for scale, that shows you the size of this. Of course, soccer field is pretty wide. But I hear that too, and I think we can come back with more detail there.
Right.
Absolutely, Kane. I think that's a great idea, and we're actually, that's being worked on right now. So we'll have time as soon as we have that. Just it's obviously, I mean, we're going fast and we're trying to program a large space quickly, but it'll at least give a sense for the scale and how we can amenitize this park, what we're thinking, why we're thinking this is such an upgrade.
Hey, I'm sorry again. Councilman Brown, did we get all your questions answered?
Yeah, I was just wanted to make sure that hill was still going to be utilized for that and it wasn't going to be the city's responsibility to maintain that.
Correct. That is correct. Yeah. I was really sorry about my internet, but yes, that is correct.
So one thing I want to draw your attention to as we talk about the future, we're on a pretty short time frame, and we have been working under a very, very short time frame with this project from the beginning. And I know that this is a pretty dramatic change. Part of the reason that we haven't brought it back to the council beforehand is that we have gone through many iterations of this layout, and it wouldn't necessarily be the most helpful in our mind for us to bring a proposal in front of the council and then come back 2 weeks later and say, actually, no, we're on a different one now. So the reason we brought this now in this format is because we've been working through many of these topics internally, and we've been trying to see what we can do to get them addressed beforehand. The other aspect of that is, and I don't say this to make it sound like I'm trying to push you away from any sort of feedback or any sort of concerns or comments on this, but if we want to stay on track for the Zion's construction timeline that we had set up earlier this year when this project first came in and really started moving, we really need to have the text amendment and the development agreements and all the other related approvals done by the council by the end of this month, which really only leaves us one more regular scheduled meeting. So if there is anything that we can do now that we can address, really it's within the next week. We need to know that as soon as possible. Tonight would be best, or even like tomorrow if possible. But if there are going to be pretty substantial changes, then we do run the risk of pushing the project later than we had originally anticipated, which has a cascading effect on timelines and process.
And by substantial changes, you mean more than the substantial changes we're being shown at the moment?
I mean, like, let's see.
I just wanted to say, so I appreciate that Zions and Gardner have been working on these, and to them this is a gem and a capstone, and they want to work on it. But it's also the same for us, in the sense this is the city that we live in, and we'll see it every day. And you know, it's hard to rush some of these things when we're just getting it, because we have to, answer to 30,000 people, right? For long term. So
I made that same point. So I totally understand.
So it's just as important to them as it is to us.
Yes. I'm just trying to make the consequences clear, so that a proper balancing can be met. I mean, we actually talked about that programming out the space last week, and if that's something that can't be done in a week, then the question arises, is it worth postponing the entire project for that to be finished? And I can't answer that question for the council. There might be other changes that need to happen in here. And so the calculus is it good enough or are we willing to postpone this flagship project on this site?
Alex, I know you can't answer for the council, but the council can answer for the council. And
that's why I bring it up.
In my opinion, it would not be worth postponing the entire project if we're just concerned about what amenity is going to be at what part of this map that we're looking at right now. So I'm not interested in postponing the project for those reasons. I don't see this as, this is just a matter of putting things in different areas. And this isn't the matter of a developer going back on their word of what they told us they were going to be doing. And in fact, to me, it makes more sense to do it this way, especially to put the park where nature already exists instead of between concrete. Makes perfect sense to me, and I think would be an easy selling point to the community.
Well, I, for one, would like to meet with you guys and go over the park. That's my biggest concern, is that we're going to get a park that's usable and that the citizens can come and use it. So if you can help me understand that, that'd be great.
Yeah, we'd be more than happy to meet with you, and we'll contact tomorrow to schedule some timing. But yes, we appreciate it. Would welcome that. Thank you so much.
I'd like to be a part of that meeting as well.
Great.
Sorry, who was that? I didn't have my.
It's Councilmember Robinson.
Okay, I'll reach out tomorrow.
I mean, I would too. We obviously can't all meet together at the same time.
Yeah, we'll do some separate meetings. Is there any other council member that'd like to meet, just while I'm writing this down?
The mayor would like to be part of a discussion too.
This is Quinn Sperry. Let me know the times and I can come to one of them as well.
Okay, sounds great. We'll do 2 or 3, whatever's needed.
You may as well include me now that everyone else has said yes. So I don't want to be the odd person out.
Done deal.
Okay, do we have any other discussion then that we need to take care of at this time? You'll get back with us then, set up the meeting schedule, and we'll join together.
Yep. Thank you so much for your time and the feedback, and we'll be in touch tomorrow to schedule. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks to all of you. Okay, Paul, it's your move.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second. Good night.
Night, everyone.